When it comes to public policy, around 20 years ago, India was stuck in a bad equilibrium. Sure, a few elites in a bubble may have had some good ideas, but by and large, the ecosystem was mediocre, if not empty. There wasn't a constant stream of sound ideas making its way to policymakers. The default thinking was stuck in the failed visions of the past. The thinkers who should have created a new world did not exist. These ideas were absent from the popular consciousness. There was nothing in the supply side of the political marketplace, and there was nothing in the demand side. It was a vicious cycle. No one spoke about these ideas and about public policy, and so not enough people wanted to do public policy, and so there was no one to train you in public policy. And even if trained experts did emerge miraculously, there weren't any jobs for them. Was it possible to break out of this vicious cycle? Could one institution play a part in every link of this chain? Guess what? The answer is yes. And that just blows my mind.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Verma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My subject today is the Takshashila institution, and my guests are Nitin Pai and Pranay Kotasane. I first met Nitin over 20 years ago when we were both early bloggers. Unlike me, he soon decided that being an armchair observer wasn't enough and he had to put skin in the game and show the conviction behind his beliefs. He started a policy magazine called Pragati, then he began a think tank called the Takshashila Institution, and then Takshashila started a policy school. They tackled every part of the problem I spoke about earlier. They were an independent think tank producing research and ideas for the state to use and for the public to better understand India with. They taught public policy to interested people, including many in the armed forces and many in government. And they popularized these ideas in a variety of ways, such as through podcasts. I consider their achievement astonishing. The policy school has taught over 10,000 people and has gotten sound ideas into the public discourse. They've produced a generation of fine scholars who are in think tanks and NGOs and private companies and in the government. They have influenced every part of the change-making apparatus. I've recorded many episodes with Takshashila folk such as Nitin, Pranay, Manoj Kevalramani, Shambhavi Nayak and many others. These are some of India's finest thinkers. And what an achievement Takshashila is. It was once a gleam in the eye of a solitary blogger, and now it is a great institution that has changed the landscape of policy in India. As you can probably make out from my tone, I could not admire them more. If you are interested in understanding India and understanding how the world works, I urge you to take their courses. They are wonderful and I'll link them from the show notes. For now though, let's get to my conversation with Nitin and Pranay. But first, a quick commercial break. Are you a watcher or are you a doer? Neil Simon once had this great quote, there are two kinds of people in the world, the watchers and the doers, and the watchers sit around watching the doers too. And in most things, unfortunately, I've been a watcher. I have great plans, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but I never get around to them. Procrastination comes in the way, self-doubt comes in the way, and you've often wondered, I'm quite sure, is there someone who can help me go past this self-doubt and get the job done? My good friends Utsav Mamoria and Chuck Gopal run something called the 6% Club. Both of them have been on The Seen and the Unseen. They're great creators. And the idea of the 6% Club is to take you from content idea to launch in 45 days. That's right. You sign up for this course and over a series of weekends, they'll teach you everything they know about content creation and help you get started. They've run 7 cohorts so far. They've taught 300 people, many of whom have started different kinds of creative products, whether it's YouTube channels, or podcasts, or newsletters, on AI, finance, health, etc., etc. Just a whole bunch of categories. They will help you find the category of one in which you belong, and their course will include masterclasses by people like me, Krish Ashok, Lavanya Mohan, Mahima Vashisht, and others. Their next batch starts in February. Their link is on their website, the6%.club. I will link it from the show notes also. And if you write to them and tell them that you heard about them from The Seen and the Unseen, you will get 10% off. So stop procrastinating. Don't be just a watcher. Become a doer. Start that virtuous cycle. Remember, the 6%.club. Go for it. Nitin and Pranay, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
I'm glad to be here, Amit. I'm glad that your listeners will tolerate me again.
I don't know whether it's a warning to the listeners.
It's a warning to the listener, you've got to tolerate me again.
No, you have done a great job building tolerance within the discourse, and I'm sure that courtesy will be extended back to you. Nitin, I want to start you by asking a question that we've probably got to know of each other almost 20 years back, circa 2005. Gradually the idea of Takshashila took shape for you, and we'll go through that early journey later in detail. But the institution's been around since 2009. It's been more than 16 years that it's going. And in this time, what has also happened is a terrible personal tragedy for both of us, which is a tragedy of aging. You are around 50, if I calculate correctly. And when we are young, when we are in our mid 30s or even in our early 30s, as we were 20 years ago, it seems like the future stretches out infinitely before you. All possibilities are open. Every decision doesn't seem like such a big deal. But what we later realize is that everything has path dependence. Many doors are one-way doors, and time passes really fast. And here we are. So what is, in all of this time, what's been your sense of time passing? What's been your sense of hitting 50 when you look back? Because you've reached a stage where all possibilities are emphatically not open for you or for any of us, right? And they never were, but when you're young, you imagine that they are. So take me through your state of mind and, how you've kind of dealt with this issue of time and possibility, and the fact that once you were a young Turk and now you're almost like an elder statesman in a way. Have you made that mental shift? Do you still think of yourself as a young man? How does it work?
Amit, this is frightening. I'm not an elder. I'm not a statesman. I was probably young once, but I don't know whether about the Turk part. But I think the sense of time and possibilities is what you say is really, really there. Let me answer it in two ways, right? One is the passing of time is real, but it's subjective time, right? Like when I was looking at photographs of my kids just last week, and the first sign of this is like, how did this happen so fast? Right? I was like, this my son, my youngest is a son. The guy was, literally I was bouncing him in my arms in that photo, and now he's taller than me, right? And I just said, how did this happen so fast, right? And I think many parents have this view that, there's a sense of guilt that they were not with the kids when the kids were young and all of that. I have none of that because I spent quite a lot of my time with my children when they were growing up. Maybe they probably don't like it as much. Why is my papa all around? Probably the kids have the opposite effect. But even so, it looks like 2010 and 2025 are just nearby, right? But then you look at it the other way. Look at it in terms of how physical objects have aged, right? I have a fountain pen which I bought in 2009. It looks really old now, right? Objects like my first iPhone, objects have aged. There is a sense of, oh my God, 15 years is a very long time. Things have aged, things have moved on. And then if you look at people, this is the third sense of subjective time, how people have grown, learnt, changed, right? I don't think, I think I'm looking for a word which captures all of these, right? Grown, changed, learned, right? Have developed. Because we have seen a lot of people become, the best of people become a lot more tentative, a lot more thoughtful, lacking the kind of certitude that they had. I would call myself one of them, right? That you have a greater amount of certitude when you're young. Maybe because of upbringing, education, theory, just the fact that you're discovering everything for the first time. And as you grow along, you sort of realize that experience is a teacher, and that experience sort of validates or invalidates what you've already learned. So the best of people are a lot less sure of themselves and what they believe in as compared to 15 years ago. But there are also a lot of people who are a lot more sure of their footing today than they were 15 years ago, right? So that's the change which I see in people. So time does make a change. Time puts weight on the wrong parts of your body, and time creates pain and pressure points in parts of your body and mind that you wish it didn't. But overall, I think you do feel at 50. I'm not at 50. Well, maybe I am. Maybe
You're
I'm
blushing like you're 49.
Yeah, I'm blushing like,
Yes.
but I would like to believe that I'm still 17 and 21 in terms of the way I engage with people. There's a sense of juvenile pleasure in making fun of things, making fun of yourself, not taking yourself seriously, and also having the confidence to say brash things, knowing that you might be entirely wrong, right? My kids would probably call this an uncle statement, like uncle's trying to be young. But in my mind, that's how I look at it, right? Can I pretend to be 17 and 21? Because that's what I feel.
That last part I can validate.
Which is that he does juvenile things.
Yeah.
So here's my next follow-up question to this. That, people often say that futurists tend to, and I think this of creators as well, futurists and creators tend to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And since you've started the journey, in a sense, you've seen both the short term and you've seen the long term. And there were things that you must have overestimated. And equally, there are things that you achieved which you must have underestimated and took you with a pleasant surprise. I'm sure there was, the things you overestimated would have been in areas of how much policy change you can actually affect. And the things you probably underestimated, I believe you must have, is in terms of how much you would transform the ecosystem of thinkers, which I believe you have. So when you think about this, how does this map with what your desires and aims were? Because when we are young, I think we make the mistake, especially when we are young men, that we focus too much on goals. And goals can be deeply toxic because either you don't achieve them and you're sad, or you achieve them but there's something else around the corner and you feel sad. Whereas if you calibrate your life in terms of, I want to do the right thing and I want to do the right thing again and again, and what happens will happen, I think that is a better path to happiness. Like the metaphor I like to talk about is something I thought of while doing my episode with Gurcharan Das, where he refers to the myth of Sisyphus. Somebody's rolling a rock up a hill. And I was thinking aloud, and I thought that if you are rolling the rock up the hill to get the rock to the top of the hill, you will forever be unhappy. But if you are rolling the rock up the hill to roll the rock up the hill, then you will forever be at peace, because that's a whole purpose. So one, how do you, in terms of what you want and what your desires are, how has that changed? And have you moved with time from a specific goal orientation to more of an orientation towards these are the right things to do? And a question for both of you, really. How has that worked on your journey?
Yeah. See, in my profession, this becomes a tricky question, right? Because what we're trying to do at Takshashila is our mandate is that, look, we want to transform India to a better country, right? A country that is richer, that is more prosperous, that is happier, and at peace with itself and peace with the rest of the world. Now, there is a certain directionality to this. You need to move in a certain direction at a certain pace to get there, right? So both the direction as well as the speed at which you move in that direction have to be right. So there's no end goal in such a thing, right? What's India's goal, right? When you say when we want to transform India, does that story ever stop? It doesn't, right? You move to, let's say, even we move to $25,000 per capita income in maybe, 20, 30 years time or more. It doesn't stop there, right? You have other challenges. You want to have better healthcare, you want to have happiness and so on. The journey of a nation state or journey of a society doesn't stop anywhere, right? So organizations like us or people like us who are interested in studying how this happens have to focus on getting the direction and the pace right. Now, if you don't get the direction and the pace right, or if you see that the direction in which society is moving or the pace at which it's moving is slow or wrong, then it creates anxiety in you, right? So and that anxiety doesn't go away when you go back home and sleep, because it's going to be there. Why is this happening? It's not like, if I was a manager in a multinational software company, I could go home, I could sleep and I could watch movies, Netflix, and, engage in other things, because, work is work. It sort of stops when you move out. Of course, you'll probably be taking calls and other things, but mentally you're out of that. You sort of log out of that. In public policy, it doesn't, because you're interested and engaged in every aspect of life, every aspect of social life. So the goal, if you say, is that to get the direction and speed right, if you think that's the goal and you're not getting there, and you're in this process, it's very hard to say that, I'm here for the process, right? Because, and especially if you're a non-profit organization who are basically channelizing donor money into social outcomes, you can't tell the donor that, I like doing what I'm doing, so give me money, right? You've got to move. And internally also, why would you do this if you're just trying to roll this? So it's much more difficult for a public policy wonk to be at peace with this question than for any other profession, right? For us, for example, we believe that the way India is structured, and I say we, I'm talking about the larger Takshashila community, right? It's not the royal we, it's the me, my friends, people like us who are involved in this.
Glad you clarified that, because there's a sense of the royal we about your personality.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a king, but now I'm just a prince. Right? No. But seriously, I think the we comes from the fact that what we're doing is really a social enterprise, right? Takshashila is not one person. It's an institution in all senses of the word. There are people who belong to the institution as staff. There are people who belong to the institution as students, as alumni, as stakeholders, as donors. So it takes all our former staff, former employees and all of that, right? So all of this comes together to form the institution. It's not, it's not a private limited company or a one-person show. There's a lot of people whom you see, and there are a whole lot of people whom you don't see. Now, we believe that India's foundational constitutional values are the best blueprint for India, right? Which is talking about pluralism, tolerance, liberty, equality, fraternity. And fraternity is a word which needs to be used more. We hear a lot less of it. People talk about liberty and equality, but fraternity is the third point of that triangle, right? You can't have any of the other two if you don't have the third. But we focus a lot more on liberty and equality. But I mean, when I say we, in this case, is people like, people, liberal-minded people focus a lot more on liberty and equality, not so much on fraternity in the true sense of the word. That is the direction we want to see, right? But if you look at politics in India since, roughly for the last 25 years, we've moved in directions which are not consistent with this. We've moved in directions where we went away from economic freedom after 1992. You would have thought that we would be on a trajectory that would take us on to greater and greater economic freedom. But we've sort of regressed from there. We've regressed from ideas of political freedom, both in the left-wing and the right-wing senses of the word. And we've regressed from the idea of equality in terms of an egalitarian society. We've regressed also from the idea of fraternity, which was weak in the first place, right? So there is a challenge for us is to, move this ship of state back into a trajectory which is consistent with our foundational constitutional values. That's the most painful and the most stressful and the kind of thing which fills us with anxiety, because it's not something which you can change alone or as an institution or even as one political party in one state or in the country, right? Everybody is at fault here. Everybody has a duty and a responsibility, and almost everybody is sort of shirking that.
I'll digress here and ask a couple of follow-up questions taking off from what you said. And the first of those is about what you say about going back to foundational constitutional values. And yes, those foundational constitutional values are things that all of us aspire to. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff in the Constitution which we shouldn't aspire to. The deep centralization, the status mindset, the fact that we are federal only in name and blah, blah, blah. The fact that free speech has so many caveats and, only lip service is paid to it, etc., etc. There are many things wrong with it. And, without referring to how every constitution is really circumstantial, and in those circumstances, it was with the country falling apart, there was obviously an impetus to centralize power and all of that. That's where it comes from. I totally get that. But my question is that isn't it, when we speak of building a better India, why are we treating one particular book as a holy book? Isn't it as much of a mistake as, say, someone of another persuasion saying that the Manusmriti is a holy book and we must organize society according to that? And here you're saying, okay, the Constitution is a holy book, even though we know it is deeply imperfect and doesn't align perfectly with our values, whatever our different values might be. Instead of just focusing on the values and aiming for that, like, is it that going back to constitutional values is a better selling point when you are using it as rhetoric in the marketplace of ideas? Or is it that you feel there is some kind of anchor required and you can't simply, couch it in vague terms of classical liberalism, and that seems too deracinated?
Yeah, first of all, I don't agree with the view that the Constitution is a holy book. In fact, I've written about this. There are a lot of people who say that the Constitution is a holy book which needs to be venerated. No, it's not. In my view, again, as an engineer, the Constitution is a user manual, right? It's a manual which says how do you run your nation state, right? You have a state called the Republic of India, and the user manual says this is how you run it, and these are the safe conditions, these are the things it's optimized for, and this is how you run it, right? And like any user manual, you can update it. There are versions you can update, there are parts of it you can update. Like, for example, what is said about centralization. Yeah, there is nothing in the Constitution which says you can't decentralize. There's nothing in the Constitution which says you can't take out or change what you call reasonable restrictions on certain things or add certain reasonable restrictions, right? So it's a very mutable, changeable blueprint. And I agree with you that there are certain parts of it which make it a very paradoxical document, and that would be the idea of social revolution. It's the only constitution which enshrines a social revolution. It's not a status quo. Most other constitutions are simple because they tell you what the president does, what the High Court does, and so on. This is a constitution which says we are going to overturn the structure of Indian society, which is thousands of years old, and all of that. And that comes with costs, right? Because it's not a anodyne document. It's a revolutionary document, and that creates paradoxes. It means you will trample on rights. You can't have a social revolution without rights being trampled upon, property being taken away. We've seen that. And that's a daily struggle. Even so, I think it's probably the one document that best captures a way for us to organize our society. I cannot think of anything better that can happen today. If we were to have a constituent assembly today and try and form a constitution, I can guarantee that we'll come up with a worse one because the conditions are very different. The kind of people who will be elected into constituent assembly will be different. The metaphor of what citizenship means, what communities mean are very different today, right? And the historical moment is different. So we'll come up with something which is more likely to be the kind of laws that we make in these days, which are not really well-formed laws. The intent might be good, but the way the laws are written, the way the rules are written, everything from the structure to the grammar to the language is not of a quality that would befit a republic like ours. So I think that the Constitution is something which is worth preserving, worth improving, but preserving in its core. Because I can't imagine what will happen if we start throwing this away and say, hey, let's do something new. I think we're going to have a lot more chaos and pain, and the cure might be worse than the disease which you're trying to solve. I think Pranay has been reading up on the Constitution. He's got something to add. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think Constitution, as we were discussing, it's not just the book, but for some of the core ideas which exist in them are more important, and it is symbolic of the idea of the republic, right? So republic, which stands for the rule of law versus, and not the rule of men or rule of group of men or rule of group of women or whatever, right? So the idea of that rule of law is important, and even the person who's the head of the state is still subject to certain rules, is the idea of the republic, right? That's at its core. And it is codified in something like a constitution. Sometimes there is no written document. So what we are trying, for example, one of the ideas that we always talk about is strengthening the Indian republic, because there's so much debate on democracy, whether India is an electocracy or a democracy or whatever. But there are very few people talking about the idea of the republic, how the individual rights stem from this idea of the republic, right? In a democracy, in a true democracy, if 99% people or 2/3 majority agree that the 1/3 people should be sacrificed, it can happen in a true democracy because it's just a procedural
It's a
form.
dictatorship of the majority.
And majority can be defined variously. So it is procedural in aspect. But what really sets things apart is the republic, which says that no, even if 99.99% of people agree, you can't do certain things to the remaining 0.01% because they have certain rights and they are there as part of the republic, and that is often there in a document like the constitution. So for us, it's not so much about that particular version or the book. If you actually see the preamble in our office, the huge preamble,
It's
it's
version.
the original preamble, right? So it's technically not the one which exists now, but we can have the one which was there earlier. So in that sense, it's not fixed in time, but the values which are there in it are important. And coming to what Nitin was saying, so this recent book, Assembling India's Constitution by Rohit Day and Ornit Shani, it talks about an interesting idea which was striking for me. So when we think of social revolution, we think, yeah, there were these elites in the Constituent Assembly, right thinking elites who gave us this constitution. But the book argues that actually that was not the case. There were lots of people, more than 7,000 letters written from different parts of the India, corners of India, who wanted to be a part of this constituent making process. And people were, the constitution, when it was released, it was a bestseller, selling like hotcakes on railway stations and things like that. So people were engaged in it. They were writing letters to it. They wanted to be a part of the Constituent Assembly even. But so that was a very inspiring story. But one thing that made me reflect while reading this also was, even though there was so much engagement about the Constitution, a lot of the demands were not of public goods. A lot of the demands from the people themselves were also about, for my group or for my things, please do things such that my group is benefited. And they can be widely defined. It was not just on caste groups. It was also women's groups. It was some people wrote that, children should be treated well. So there was wide things in it. But still there was very little talk that, this idea of generally everyone in India should have non-rivalrous, non-excludable goods, which we call public goods. That demand was not there. So that was striking for me in the way how constitution.
It's not surprising because that's been our biggest weakness, right? And I think we've talked about this in another show also, that there is a very, very weak sense of we, which means public goods will be underprovided and negative externalities like pollution, etc., will go on unabated. It's not a surprise that we have bad atmospheric pollution in Indian cities. It's not a surprise that our roads are dirty. It's not a surprise that our public buildings are ugly, right? There is no sense of us, which means you just treat public spaces as something you want to exploit, right, for your own personal or your group needs. You don't have a sense that this public space belongs to all of us with a capital U.
Or someone listening to a YouTube video without their headphones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I'll just give context to the listeners about the preamble bit that you mentioned, that Ambedkar's original preamble did not have the word secular and socialist. He has made eloquent arguments against including these words. His argument for secular simply was that secularism is in any case running through the constitution. It's a vibe of the constitution. You don't need to pay lip service to it. And about socialism, he simply said that, look, at this moment in time, we agree socialism is the way to go, but this is something that should forever be up for debate, and you cannot set it in stone and ossify it, and therefore he was against it. And Indira Gandhi added both of these, and I personally have no objection to the word secular being there. That fine, put it there, there's no problem with it. But socialist, I do have a problem, because it's failed everywhere, it's disastrous, it's public ownership of private property, it tramples on individual rights, and it's literally there in our constitution. I agree with both of you in the sense that, Nitin, I agree that the constitution we have is much better than any constitution we could have if we set up an assembly now. That would be a disaster. And we are still relatively lucky that we have what we have. And I also agree with you, Pranay, that to be a republic is super important. The constitution plays a role in that. But does this particular constitution do the job, in the sense that if the problem with the Indian state is that we do too many things badly instead of a few things well, as we should, that's due to the design of the constitution. If most Indian people behave like subjects and not citizens, that's due to the design of the constitution. But I get the broader point, but that is why I sometimes feel uncomfortable when one talks about following the values of the constitution, because I'm saying all this stuff is also there.
Actually, Ambedkar was asked this question at the Constituent Assembly itself, that this constitution is bad and this, that, and the other. So what he says is that there is no such thing as a good or bad constitution. It says a fantastic constitution can be driven to the ground if the people who called upon it are a bad lot, right? So his argument is it's all about the people called upon to operate that constitution. I agree with him, right? It's about people. At the highest levels of power, all constitutional arrangements are role play, right? I mean, we look at Rajendra Prasad. Before he was president, he was a Congress leader, right? He probably ranked lower than Nehru and the others in the Congress hierarchy. But when he becomes president, he is the president of the republic. So he plays that role. And people who are below him or above him in the Congress hierarchy and now below him in the state hierarchy have to play their role and accept the fact that Rajendra Prasad is the president. So I think that role play, the expectation that everybody will play according to that role, is what makes that constitution at the highest level and also at the lowest level. And when I'm a citizen, when I go out and vote, when I ask for certain things, it's me playing the role as a citizen. It could be that the MP or an MLA is my classmate or my brother, right? But that my private relationship with that person is very different from my civic relationship with that person. So even if that MLA is my brother and the roads have a problem, right, I should go out and say, my roads are not working, get my roads fixed. I can't just excuse him because he's my brother.
Yeah, in fact, I'll read out Ambedkar's response. Like, there was an amendment by K.T. Shah in 1948 where he tried to say socialists should be part of the preamble. And Ambedkar opposed that by saying a couple of things, where he says, number one, the constitution is merely a mechanism for the purpose of regulating the work of the various organs of the state. It's not a mechanism whereby particular members of particular parties are installed in office. And then he goes on to say that if you state in the constitution that the social organization of the state shall take a particular form, you are, in my judgment, taking away the liberty of the people to decide what should be the social organization in which they wish to live. And a couple of more lines, and then he ends by saying, I do not see, therefore, why the constitution should tie down the people to live in a particular form and not leave it to the people themselves to decide it for themselves. This is one reason the amendment should be opposed.
Yeah, I think you quotes Jefferson also, because Jefferson says that in the context of the US Constitution, that you shouldn't bind future generations to your ways of seeing things.
Wise words. Let's get back to Takshashila, because we've discussed a lot of other issues in other episodes. And I want to, before getting down to the concrete history of Takshashila, I want to ask another broader question, and it's something I wonder about both of you. Like, one reason I admire everyone who works in Takshashila is because it's not just a job. All of you could have been earning way better money, rising much higher up different corporate ladders if you were to do what you do. Nitin started this with this sense of belief and purpose that this is worth doing. And there's a selection effect to that, firstly, because in everyone who does the GCPP courses or attaches themselves to Takshashila, in a way, already shares some of that desire, that curiosity, that purpose. And then, Pranay, people like yourself who actually come on to work full-time and build it, share that purpose even more. So it's like that selection effect multiplied, that from a pool of people who are already interested and committed, you get another pool of people who are willing to go all in and take that one-way door and say, okay, this is what I will do, and I'm not going to think of the counterfactuals and all of that. So give me a little sense of that for both of you, that where did that sense of purpose come from? Did it evolve over time? And has it been difficult? Are there moments in the journey where you said, what am I doing? Where you look at people who were your peers in the past, who are living glamorous lives or richer lives or whatever. And the honest truth is that a lot of what you guys do is stuff that you're never going to get credit for. Right? Because it is not attributable, it is not measurable, you're never going to get credit for it, but you do it because it's the right thing to do. What is the journey to arriving there?
See, in my view, there are three reasons why anybody would do this, right? Including me. One is what you would call your intrinsic motivation. And you do feel that you've got to change something. You've got to do something with your life, right? And to me, this has been as old as I can remember, is to, I wouldn't call it patriotism, nationalism. I don't know what I don't have a word for it, but it's a view which says that, look, we've got to do better for ourselves, and you can't have, I think I've mentioned this, a child begging on the streets. This is just not us. We've got to go into a different orbit. And as a country, as a society, we've got to do better, right? And some of us who can think about those things have to think about it and do it. Of course, a lot of us, at least in our generation, couldn't easily get into any of these lines. I mean, I could, if I was in 12th grade and I told my father that, I want to go and do something in social thing. First of all, avenues were not very clear. It would mean that, go and work in a Gandhian kind of an establishment, or do some development work, NGO work where you take foreign money and translate it into development. That's not exciting at all, right? I mean, it's a valuable service, but it's not exciting to me. My father would have gotten like, hey, are you out of your mind, right? So, going into a professional stream, India was liberalizing, studying engineering or medicine or professions was the option available to most of us. But even when I was doing that, it was clear to me that at some point I have to come back and do this, right? I was looking for opportunities, which is how the blog started, which is how the rest of it started. The opportunities, just looking for several opportunities. Some of the early ones didn't work out, but finally, 2009 and 10 was, things came together and worked out. So there is intrinsic motivation, and that's important. And I think it's important for me, and it's important for almost everybody at Takshashila, right? You've got to have this public service mindedness where you're doing something to improve the lot of others. It might call upon you to make a sacrifice in terms of maybe your pay structure, maybe your career path through a corporate setup. For example, before I started Takshashila, in my previous corporate life, I was traveling well in great airlines, staying in 5-star accommodation because it's corporate travel. The moment Takshashila started, it's almost you're traveling budget airlines, staying in budget rooms, literally sleeping in railway stations. It's almost the Gandhian thing. There is no 4th class, so you're in 3rd class. Because this is donor money, right? And our values and ethos is that you're not going to use donor money to splurge it on luxuries for yourself. So yes, those are the kinds of sacrifices you need to make. And I think everybody in Takshashila is aware of that. And that's because intrinsic motivation. But there are two other parts, right? There's instrumental and extrinsic. The instrumental motivation for a lot of people is that this is a means to an end. And the end could be changing policy of their choice, improving a particular sector. It could be life sciences, defense, technology, various areas, right? So, or economic policy. So there are people who feel that the Takshashila route is a way for you to change things. There are also who feel that it's an instrumental way. Younger people feel that this is what they want to do when they are in their early 20s. Get that experience under the belt, because you get to do in Takshashila what I don't think there are any other, old style institutions which give you that opportunity, right? You literally get to do your own writing, your own thinking. You can challenge everyone in the organization. So it's a free place for thinking. And people get to be on television and get bylines in newspapers, the week that they join us, right? So those opportunities, they feel are valuable for them to learn and get into a different kind of a profession or job, right? So people go abroad and study, go and take a job in, government relations, etc. So there are private sector careers open to them. So there are instrumental reasons. There is also now I would call the extrinsic reason, where it's kind of cool to be a think tanker, right? It's cool, it's not, although you might not make as much money as your counterparts in the private sector or in startups or in the tech industry, but the fact that you are a policy wonk counts as cool. Right, and there are people who want to be in that cool. So that's the. I'll give you a recent story. I was in this setting, this place. I don't want to explain what the setting is. I was in this place where there are a lot of rich people. So one guy comes up to me and says that there are a lot of HNIs around here, and are you also an HNI? And I said, isko sach kaise bataye? So then I said, no, I'm not an HNI, I'm an HSI. And he says, what's an HSI? So it is a high self-worth individual.
Wow, very cool.
So I think that the third part is there. It's like a lot of work we do, whether we boast about it or not, does give you a better sense of yourself. Your self-worth, I think, increases, or your acknowledgement of your self-worth increases, because you are now doing a lot of things not because it enriches you or benefits you personally, but because it benefits others, right? So that altruistic bent probably is useful, and I think it's a character enhancing thing. You don't realize it until you do it. I think Pranay probably can add a corrective to my spiel.
No, I think always there is that mix of the three motivations, right? Intrinsic, extrinsic, instrumental. You see it in different proportions in different people. But for a lot of, if I would characterize a lot of the people who would have joined, there is some sense of that intrinsic motivation about being long on India is the most dominant thing, I guess. That we want to see India a better place, and if that is the case, this is a great opportunity to be able to be a part of that. Not that you will make some changes. It takes time, right? You won't be able to make changes in 2 years or 3 years. It will take time, but that kind of intrinsic motivation, I think, is the prominent driver amongst the other three. For me, I mean, personally, I can say I always wanted to be in India. So for me, it was never a question. And what are the ways in which you can make India a better place? Earlier, it used to be, can you become and like starting a company was never I was not wired to think about that, but it was always this government, get into government, IAS. This used to be, I think these are still dominant things. Most people who go there are also intrinsically motivated, I would say. And that was the thing, which when that didn't work out, I was looking for, what are the ways in which you can make an impact, being in India, being in a organization which is also proudly Indian, and fully realizing that we are not saying India is the greatest place in every respect. Right? There are so many flaws, and that's why you want India to improve. And that's when public policy as a idea and the courses that Takshashila does opened a new window to a lot of us. So most of the people at Takshashila came to the course Takshashila through the course, right? So and that opened a new window that yes, you can probably contribute in one way or the other while having fun, right? Because that's important, and that was the idea through the public policy courses, and then many people sort of found Takshashila as a home to do that. So for me, at least I can speak for myself, but that comparison with others, don't think that's ever been a factor. What disappoints is mostly that the change that you want to see doesn't happen, right? So that's more of the things that would disappoint. But the comparison with others, not so much, because like Nitin said, it's not just the package at a place like Takshashila is not just about the monetary compensation, right? It is also the fact that you're getting to write, you're getting to do the things that you would never have the opportunity in a corporate structure, right? You would not be able to have bylines in a newspaper. You would not be able to be on seen and unseen or anything like that, right?
Yeah, and look at it, we have young people who probably is just fresh out of college sitting next to Montek Singh Ahluwalia for hours together and discussing geoeconomics and economic policy. You have people sitting next to General Menon and talking about military history. I mean, these are the kind of people you would not get to meet, right? Forget about spending hours together. So the wonderful thing about being in a think tank is you have access to really wise, smart people, right? And it's not because of the celebrity value, because you sit down and talk to them, the transfer of knowledge, right? Just the breathing the same air as some of these people who've been there, done that, gives you a perspective. They might be right, they might be wrong. You might agree with them, you might disagree with them, right? But the fact that you're interacting with them does a lot to your growth. And I can't think of many 21-year-olds anywhere in the world who can interact with people who've created history. I'm using Montek because he was there. 1992 was he was there when India reformed. It's like you're in the same room as Nehru and Patel, and talking to them about what happened in 1947. It's like you're talking to Montek and he was there. And you have 21-year-olds who are learning and talking to him. It's a fantastic opportunity. I don't think anything in the private sector comes close. I mean, I would say, and I tell this to people who want to do non-profit work, that doing for-profit work is the first thing you should do, right? Entrepreneurs create value. Business people create value and wealth, right? A lot of the money which we get is because people who have made money in the private sector give it to us as charity, right? So if Indian entrepreneurship didn't exist, if the tech industry didn't exist, we wouldn't have existed. I think even the Buddha said that somewhere, says that, go and do business, be a worldly person before you think of becoming a monk, right? So I have great respect, and that's what you should do. But that's not the only thing, because there are other things you could do. And working for the benefit of others is probably the second most interesting thing you could do after making money for others, right? I mean, the founders of Infosys, the founders of Biocon, the founders of Wipro, the founders of even more recent companies, who've made it big, have created wealth, employment for thousands of people, right? Many cities exist because of these people. So that is certainly something you should do if you can. There's no better way of changing India outside government than being an entrepreneur and creating wealth and value.
Absolutely, can't agree more. Let's get on now to the actual journey which led to Takshashila. And again, I've got to clarify for listeners that the first part of this podcast is going to be more of Nitin than Pranay or me, because it's your journey. Pranay comes a little later in the journey.
And I talk too much.
No, you don't. What is too much? I mean, in the context of my episodes, what the fuck is too much?
Yeah. You said India's...
we were at a party and we had to introduce ourselves, and I jokingly said that I'm the only man in India who knows how to listen. And Nitin said he's the worst listener in India. So together that makes us average.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take me through the early part of that journey. In the Life and Times episode we have done, you did speak a little bit about it, but with reference to how you get deeper and deeper into thinking about public policy, thinking about should we do a policy magazine, the journey to Takshashila, how does that happen? Because initially you are a blogger, you start a group blog with a bunch of people, and bloggers, like I was a blogger, bloggers talk a lot but do nothing. But all of you became men of action and actually tell me about that journey, how those years went.
Yeah, I think blogging has something to do with this, right? Because one reason I moved from my food blog to write the Acorn was this broad idea of that sometime in the future we've got to organize something and, form an organized effort to change policy. It was very vague. That's why it's called an acorn, right? Mighty oaks grow from an acorn. That's the reason why it's called the acorn. I was not very sure what form it will take, but that was the sort of vector pointing in that direction. And then that led to meeting smart people whom we all know. And the earliest generation of bloggers, I think we had one of the best intellectual communities ever, right? In my life, at least, that we had.
And you and I were there, so obviously it was
obviously we were the average. Maybe we got the average down. I don't know, but there were really, really smart people there with whom we could hang out and learn. And the engagement was sharp. It was not politically correct, but it was sharp. It was respectful. Sometimes things would get out of hand, but mostly it was a great place to hang out with smart people and learn. That led to forming the group blog called the Indian National Interest. And then Pragati came next as a magazine. Right, we were the first magazine, international relations magazine to come out of India. It was entirely digital, and then we had a small print run. And then we also had the first podcast. Pragati, Mohit Satyanand was the voice of Pragati. It was a 10-minute podcast which we started in 2009.
I did not know this.
Yes. and Mohit Satyanand's voice would come, this is Pragati, it is this wonderful voice of Mohit Satyanand. It was a sort of a summary of the most important articles in that magazine. Somewhere around that time, this is around 2008 and 9, things started coming in. The pieces started falling together, right? We spoke to a lot of people. A lot of people said, hey, this is a great idea. You should continue making the magazine. What's next, right? I was in a conversation at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy with a friend and his colleague who was a chartered accountant. And This guy says, "Sir, we should build something like this." Then I looked around and said, "Do you mean Singapore?" He says, "No, no, no, no. We need to build something like this in India." And he meant the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And, he's this chartered accountant. It's the first time he's ever seen a school of public policy. And he looked at it and said, "This is exactly what we're missing in the country. Because we have business schools, we have great engineering schools, we have people who take UPSC coaching classes, but we don't have a school of public policy where people from various disciplines, various countries come and learn things in a structured way." And then it clicked, right? This is the sort of idea that will make sense in India of 2009, right? And then you look back and see the United States 100 years ago, in 1909, was very much like India of 2009. You had a lot of politics, you had a lot of corruption, a lot of people had made their money in the gold, the Gilded Age. And then they created institutions like the Council on Foreign Affairs, Council for Foreign Relations, the Carnegie Endowment, and so on. So, Rand Corporation.
Brookings, 1916.
Yeah. So, all of these institutions were formed and which created an intellectual community around what the American state should do. And by 2009, it's a superpower, richest country in the world, and so on. I thought there is something for us to learn from that, right? Those institutions which created the United States, created the modern public policy world which was emulated by everybody else. Something which we didn't have, and we should learn and emulate. But then look at India in 2009. I came and I started exploring the space. If you had $100 million from Lee Ka-shing, which is how the Lee Kuan Yew School started. Lee Ka-shing, the Hong Kong billionaire, gave $100 million and the Singapore government matched it. So they had $200 million to start with, a great campus, etc. I mean, you can do a lot of things. But if Nitin Pai arrives in Bangalore and says, I want to build a public policy school, people look around and they don't even laugh. Because if they laugh, at least they're acknowledging what. They just look at you strangely, right? What are you talking about? So that was that new. Because people thought that public policy is only what people who do people in government do. So it's about UPSC courses or, training people to join government. So we had to be different. So the model for Takshashila was that we had to be a think tank which would create ideas. We had to be a training institution which would equip people with those ideas. And we had to be some kind of a megaphone which would engage in public debate, public discourse, right? We had to be 3 in 1. In the United States, these 3 are different things, right? Rand Corporation is a think tank. Brookings Institution is a think tank. Kennedy School is a school of public policy. And maybe the Atlantic Magazine or Wall Street Journal is a media house, right? We had to be all of the 3 in order to make sense in the Indian context. The second thing is, no one's going to give us $200 million to start a think tank in India, right? So we had to think differently. And the good news again, because we were born out of like you and I, we were born out of the internet, right? The internet as a metaphor and the internet as a technology allowed us to create an institution which is unlike anything else, right? And this is a very funny thing which my colleagues later discouraged me from talking about openly, but I will talk about it openly now. For the longest period, I used to give the analogy of Takshashila being like Al-Qaeda. And why? Because nobody knows where the headquarters of Al-Qaeda is, but they operate everywhere, right? And they have their effect everywhere. They don't need an office. They don't have an office, but they operate as a network fashion, communicating through videotapes at that time. And the US National Security Council, there's a committee of the US National Security Council came to meet us in 2015. And I gave them this metaphor that Takshashila is like Al-Qaeda. And after that, people just tapped me on the shoulder and said, okay, I think you've got to stop this metaphor. But that's how it was. Takshashila didn't have an office for the longest period of time. I didn't want to have an office. We should not use our money on real estate, on cars and buildings and air conditioning. Let's work from our homes or wherever and put the money to use to create intellectual output rather than to pay for real estate. And that idea is still what underpins the way the organization is structured. Of course, we have an office now, we have air conditioning now, but the idea is that you're a networked organization, right? You're connecting to smart people wherever they are, rather than insisting that the smart people come to a building and work from 9 to 5, right? And that was the technology of the times. For example, when we started our public policy school, the first course was delivered using GoToMeeting, right? I don't know whether people remember it now. It's a precursor of Zoom and of same generation as Skype. It's a precursor of Zoom and WebEx, right? And we were delivering courses on GoToMeeting from 2012 all the way to 2019 and 20, when people discovered Zoom, right? And then we sort of switched over to Zoom. So we were doing that. So when COVID came, it was water off our backs. We just continued as usual because it was all online. So that's the early story, right? It's about really aggregating the resources that you have available to you and using them in a creative way to solve a problem that needed to be solved, which meant not, maybe now that I look back and you said, 15 years, what do you think about time? One alternative way is that maybe if I had gone and persuaded someone to give us $100 million on day one, we would have been in a different kind of an orbit, a big organization which is not shy to spend money. We are a small organization which is extremely shy to spend money. The ethos is that, look, every rupee that we get is a donor rupee, and it has to be spent in the most prudent way as possible. I wouldn't use the word frugal because frugal has a sense of cutting corners, but prudent, which means you live in a, you take good, safe, high quality options, but they are not opulent, they are not luxurious, right? But sometimes people misunderstand this. They misunderstand prudent operation as being a small time operation, right? So visually, people like to see you do an event in a 5-star hotel in all sort of jing bang and say, oh, why are you doing this in a small? You must be a small timer, right? So branding wise, it can have a problem, and branding wise, it can also have a problem in attracting donors, because I've noticed that many donors like to give money to institutions that are already well endowed. Yeah, maybe if someone had given me $100 million in 2010, we would have been in a different place.
Maybe a worse place? Would it have got into your head? Would the power have corrupted you, changed you?
I am pretty sure power would have corrupted me, because I don't think anyone can escape being corrupted by power. And I've seen organizations quickly descend into internal politics the moment the funding is secure. Because if many government organizations are like that, right? Because your salary is secure, your projects are secured. So who doesn't want to be the director? Who doesn't want to be the CTO? Who doesn't want to be the CFO, right? So there is always a tussle to get into these kind of office rooms in the C-suite, so to speak. And that creates a whole lot of negative politics within the organization. If your funding is not secure and the role of senior leadership is to bring in that kind of money, then very few people want to be in senior leadership because you have to do fundraising, right? And you have to be responsible for revenue. And it sort of tempers down nasty internal politics. I think so.
So here's a question that I've thought about in the past as well. You mentioned the 3 different things that you do. You are a full stack policy school, you are a visible national think tank, you are a public facing media producer. To me, these 3 are very dissonant. I mean, there's a reason they're different in the US. They're very dissonant because your incentives are different, your imperatives are different. For example, what a think tank wants to do is that if they want their work to be measurable and attributable, as donors will insist upon, and we'll come to that later, they want to actually point to something and say, we made that change. And therefore, the temptation is to work in collaboration with the government wherever you can and to be happy with incremental change and not be idealistic and all that. The policy school wants to just go deep into nuances, teach the first principles, go deep into nuances, equip the people to, equip their students to think well for themselves and become a part of the ecosystem and enrich the discourse. And The media producer might also have the same kind of incentive I have felt for myself, which is expand the Overton window. That don't be afraid to say outrageous things, because they make slightly less outrageous things seem relatively reasonable, right? And that's how you can expand the playground on which freedom flourishes. And all of these are at odds. What is also at odds is that, in the sense of being a policy school, I would say that the correct value there is to think of it in a for-profit way and say that if we are providing value, people will pay for it, and we should not ask for donors for that. And you guys have done that very successfully. You've charged a premium. People have valued the course. They've paid money for it. It's worked. The courses that I teach, I charge money for. One of them is fairly premium, because my ethic is that if I am providing value, people will pay. It's not a service to the world in that sense. But at the same time, as a think tank, the incentives are different. As a public-facing media producer, also to some extent, profit doesn't really matter if you really believe in the message and if you're playing the long game. And question for both of you then: how does one reconcile these different things? That when the government announces a particular policy, say a labor law reform or whatever, you can actually react to it in three different ways based on which hat you're wearing at the moment.
Yeah. Let me answer this in two dimensions of this, and then Pranay is probably much better at answering this than I am. But let me just answer it in two, right? One is conceptually, you're absolutely right. And somebody told me this in 2009 when we were starting off, that you can't survive because the three things that you want to do work at cross purposes, right? We are not a neutral think tank, right? We have a point of view. We stand for freedom, we stand for tolerance, we stand for India as a power in international relations. We believe in constitutionalism and strengthening the republic, right? So these are not value neutral. It's not a centrist thing, right? This has a particular point of view. We are strongly in favor of liberalization, strongly in favor of economic freedom. So this doesn't. It's not a non-ideological thing, right? There is ideology, free market ideology, liberal ideology in the way we think, or nationalist ideology in what we think in terms of national power. But a policy school cannot be a indoctrination outfit, and that's been because I'm a science-minded person. Education cannot be an indoctrination outfit. That's why the Takshashila Policy School does not advocate anything. The Takshashila Policy School allows a person to learn the disciplines required to do public policy and then navigate by your own lights. I mean, if you ask Takshashila, yes, we have a point of view, we'll point you in this particular direction, but you're free to follow your own. So in that sense, that public policy school does not demand that every student come out sort of vibes to the values of Takshashila. We are not. And we shouldn't be doing that, because that fails the test of education, right? It's about open. One thing we do, and Anupam is probably the person you should talk to, is we sort of deprogram a lot of minds which have been programmed, right? There are a lot of programming is already done through the education system, through the media. There is a lot of junk which has been put into the minds of our people in the name of education. So a lot of that deprogramming has to happen. But other than that, we don't indoctrinate. The third, the media, for example, has to go for readership, right? So in that sense, you have to do what is popular, not what is right or what you think is necessary. So people said, look, it's not going to work out. You can't do all three. But this is like the bumblebee effect, right? I said, we do all three and we seem to be able to manage this. But managing it requires you to be internally very clear and consistent in terms of your principle, right? The think tank advocates these values. The policy school is independent, it's interested in education, not in indoctrination. And the media house very specifically says, you're not going to chase analytics. For the longest time, and even now, I don't look at analytics. I don't look at which article is doing what is more popular. Say, look, this is what we are out here for. We're going to talk about labor laws. We believe this is how the labor environment should be structured. We're going to put this out. Now, whether people like it or not, we're going to put this out. So that is one way you could do this, but it requires a lot of discipline. It requires a lot of commitment to principle, right? And it can be done. The second element of this is, what about the business element of this, right? Like, how does it work? Every single course that we teach, the fees are below cost, right? It is a premium course in terms of the quality of the course, but the fees are way, way, way below our cost. Forget about market price. And the reason, Amit, the difference between your courses and what some other market-based courses and ours is that a lot of people who are taking our courses are not people who can afford those courses. But we need them to be able to take those courses to do better, right? So, you have people working in non-profits. You have people working in difficult areas. You have students who want to get into government and other things. They can't afford a course which charges market price or at cost. And you know how it costs, right? To deliver a high quality program, there are costs involved. There are serious costs. You need to pay people, there's technology, there's compliance and whole sort of things. But if we price it at cost, it's not going to happen. So all our courses are subsidized. Defense officers are subsidized. Almost every single person is subsidized, right? And we do that because we can get to the right people, right? Ultimately, is that student who's... Look, I have, in our GCPP program, we take about 300 per batch. So we have 300 slots in our magazine, right? Every single slot is meaningful because 300 in the context of a 1.4 billion population is tiny, right? So every single slot matters. So every single student whom we educate is a chance that, or a bet we are making that we are going to make India better, right? So I have to make sure that I get the right one, not only the people who are willing to pay, because then you get into a very different world. So yeah, the tensions are there, and it's the bumblebee thing. We just exist.
What's a bumblebee thing?
Oh, that's the story. Somebody looked at a bumblebee and the physicist said, look, the weight of the bumblebee is such that it can never fly. The aerodynamics, the aeronautical engineer says, look, the wings are not going to generate enough thrust for the bumblebee to fly. The people from biology said, look, it's not going to generate enough energy for it to be able to fly, given the kind of things that it eats. And the bumblebee doesn't know any of this, so it flies.
Such a beautiful story. Bias for action.
Yeah.
Right there. Don't listen to naysayers.
If I can add to this, that dissonance is definitely exists. I can concretely talk about it. For example, in the media, a lot of the news stories that you see are focused on people, and you get lot of traction if you attack people. But we explicitly say that think about ideas, not people. That is really core to what we do, which means by definition our media stories will not travel that far, because extreme views and attacking people or praising people obviously reaches a lot more, but we intentionally restrain ourselves. So that trade-off always exists. There is a dissonance. But looking at other organizations, if you see, most of the firms, organizations in most places are a creation of the context they are in. So think tanks in the US or policy school existed in their context in the early 20th century. But if I see for India in 2009, I cannot imagine an institution which does not do all these three things together and being successful. Because see, if you want to change any project, any small thing in India, I think you can't do by 20 think tankers sitting on a table and writing some policy documents. I don't think that can bring about change. You need to be able to convince a large number of people, right? Like what Nitin was mentioning, a lot of it is about also unlearning. Right? And when you were talking about Overton window, the theory of change is, if we demand their things that we want, probably the politicians will mostly respond to it, because that's what Overton window idea also says, right? In a democracy, politicians have to respond to what people are. So the project is not just about getting to a government officer and telling them, why don't you do this? The project is for us as a society to reimagine and think about what the Indian state should do and what should it not do. And for that, you can't do that by 20 think tankers writing a report in English and distributing it. So you need to have a much larger number of people. We have not gotten there, but probably you need, like we put it, you need lakhs of scholar warriors, right? Who are also learning and who are also practicing it in their context. So for that, you need the course. You need people who are not part of the organization on a daily basis, but are also learning the challenges of India and trying to address it in their own context. And then you also need this element of how do you take these ideas, because they are counterintuitive, they are not the way most of India would think. You also need to be engaged in public discourse. So that's why, now we have almost one opinion piece every weekday
Wow.
in some or the other newspaper. So that idea is also there, and I would say it's not just in English also. So we also try to do things in Kannada, Hindi, and whatever we can in different languages. So that is the part of the media. So I, in today's context for India, I think all three are really essential. And when this project sort of idea started, you would see in India we didn't have the curriculum, didn't have the teachers, we didn't have the students for public policy outside government, right? Even the public policy courses which existed at that time were meant for people who were already in government. So in that sense, you had to create all three. And when you start doing that, for me, I as a when I'm writing policy documents, it's really important to be also able to think through these ideas with the people who are smarter than me, and who come from very different professional backgrounds. So for example, I'm writing something on semiconductor policy. I need to know people who are in the semiconductor domain also, and they might not have a good idea about policy, but they will have deep domain expertise about semiconductors. That happens through the courses, right? So we have people who are in those professional backgrounds, but they have some peripheral interest in public policy. So the comparative advantages are different, and they combine quite well. So that's how I would put it.
This is really useful because what seemed dissonant to me actually seems extremely coherent now, in the sense that the frame that I was just thinking of while thinking about what you guys are doing is that, and my next question will be about the ecosystem in 2009, but the way I think of it is there was a vicious cycle in operation. The vicious cycle was that a think tank can't possibly be influential or get good ideas out because your ecosystem of thinkers is extremely limited, and that ecosystem of thinkers will necessarily be limited because the ideas aren't out there in the public domain enough, and therefore it is a vicious cycle and nobody solves it. So if you want to solve it, you can't enter one aspect of this. You have to tackle all three and you have to keep at it, and then there is a chance that you turn it into a virtuous cycle. Your ideas get out there enough, so some people say, hey, I want to be in policy, and then you have the policy school where you can train those people, and then some of them work for you and join the think tank, and even if they're outside, the discourse is better. So that's a coherent picture. So, is that a summation?
You nailed it. Because the way we say that is one of our modus, a theory of change is connecting good people to good ideas to good networks, right? So you need good people, but good people alone is not enough, right? There's this famous story of the monkey which saw a fish drowning in the water, so he hung it up from a tree, right? Because the monkey meant well; he wanted to save the fish from drowning, but So many things in public policy and economics are counterintuitive. So good people can end up making very, very bad mistakes. So you need to connect them to good ideas, right? And good ideas, the core of what you need to know in good ideas is what we teach in GCPP. In 3 months of intense study, you can learn what you need to know in public policy, right? You take good people, good ideas, and you most importantly connect them into networks and opportunities where change can happen, right? This could range from as simple as getting people jobs, right? People, somebody in some organization wants a trained person, you can do matchmaking of jobs. But more than that, it's about creating platforms where people can shine, right? Giving people platforms to write, giving platforms on your podcasts. Taking talented people, putting them into a different orbit. That's something which I learned from the old, the old giant K. Subramaniam, right? The strategist. So when I did Pragati, this is in 2007, I asked him to write an article for Pragati. He said, "Why are you asking me?" I said, "Because you are K. Subramaniam and we want to tap your horses." He says, "Okay, I'll write for you." But I could make out that he was like saying, "Why me?" Right? Then I spoke to Arun Singh, who was Rajiv Gandhi's advisor, Minister of State for Defense, a very thoughtful person who sort of secluded himself from public life. And he said, "Why did you get K. Subramaniam? Did he write for you?" He said, "Yeah, but he was sort of reluctant." He said, "I'll tell you why he's reluctant." He said, "Look, K. Subramaniam can write for the Times of India, Hindustan Times, Indian Express, or appear on NDTV or Doordarshan like that. He just needs to call the editor and say, I want. He'll come." And everybody has heard K. Subramaniam. There's no big advantage that Pragati has by giving K. Subramaniam a slot, because everybody knows and he can speak. Your advantage would be to get the next K. Subramaniams. Find young, talented people, give them a platform, and use so that they can use the platform and become successful and create change, right? So that stuck with me, right? The K. Subramaniam Arun Singh conversation was really them telling you what space you need to occupy. There's no point in you becoming another Times of India, right? Like, why would you want to be another Times of India? It already exists. But this is the place, Takshashila, to this day, is the place where we really create platforms for talented, motivated young people to be successful, right? Because in their successful is Takshashila's success, but more importantly, in their success is India's success. Because now we're taking good people and pointing them in the right direction, right? So the monkey doesn't take the fish out of the water at all. The monkey allows the fish to maybe there's a metaphor here. It's come out of this conversation. Let the fish swim.
Yeah.
Don't mess with the fish.
No, bro, but social revolution, the fish should get equal treatment with the monkey placed at the top of the tree. But yeah, tell me about what was the ecosystem of all of these areas when you started in 2009. What was a think tank world like? What was a policy world like? What was academia like in the way it intersected with these worlds? What was wrong with them? Give me a sense of...
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Now, if you look back at 2009, most of the think tanks were Sarkari. They were either funded by government or owned by government, whether they're in defense or in non-defense. There were just a handful of them which were semi-private. But even those semi-private ones would be servicing government, right? The purpose was, so they would be in the New Delhi belt. Most of them would get money from government and sort of be very close to the establishment view, right? There was no independence. I think there were a couple of good think tanks like CPR when Pratap Bhanu Mehta was leading it. It was a good think tank. And some of them had potential, like ORF at that time had potential. Samir Saran had not yet taken over, so it had potential. But largely it was a sort of a static scene. Independence was something nobody had understood, right? Like, why? What do you mean by an independent think tank and non-partisan, right? What is this? Because even those, that's the other thing. The organizations that existed, even if they were sort of outside this sort of catchment of government, were partisan ideologically in one way or the other, right? So, and most of them at that time were leftist, right? There was a whole amount of socialist, leftist thinking. People then and even now conflate liberal thinking with leftist economics, right? So that conflation was there. It was still the dominant paradigm in Delhi. That's what the think tank space was. And most people there in think tanks would be above the age of 45, right? The young people would just be interns and doing photocopying and research assistants. Most of the scholars, etc., would be 45 and above. It was a graying temples and grey hair business. It was not a young people's business. Samir changed this with ORF, but generally that's what it was. Policy schools, there were none outside government. There was, of course, Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in Mussoorie, and the Bangalore IIM Bangalore had the Center for Public Policy, but these were all training government people. It was unthinkable for anyone to go to a private place, for a private individual to go to a private place to study public policy. It would never happen. There was no such thing. There was no public policy school in the private sector. I think MIT in Pune had a school of government early on. So that's probably one exception. MIT, as in the Maharashtra Institute of Technology, had a school of government. But that was it. Media, of course, you know how it was, right? Media 2009 was at the cusp of a change from electronic media to social media. There's a whole lot of thing going on. But even there, if you notice, apart from Mint, the newspaper which you and I both wrote for, the editorial line of most newspapers was left of center. It was, even if they were pro-economic reform, there was a lot of left of center thinking. So that's where we were, right? How we changed this, right? I think our contribution to this change is, one, to show that young people can do public policy in a think tank, right? And to show that you don't need to be a former government bureaucrat to start a think tank and operate a think tank. And second is to show that you don't need to hew to the orthodoxy in Delhi, whether it's the political orthodoxy or the economic orthodoxy, in order to be an independent think tank, right? And third, maybe to show that you don't need to be in Delhi, right? You can be very well in Bangalore and do this. That's in the think tank space. And I think the biggest success for me is that I think we proved that you can do public policy in the private sector. Right now, there are half dozen institutions which do fairly well in public policy education in the country. Many of these are universities which are well endowed, which is wonderful, because if you have private universities which are setting up public policy schools with the kind of financial resources to get great talent, that's a boon for the country. But I still think I'm dissatisfied, because I think every state in India needs 2 public policy schools. Having half dozen across the country doesn't make sense. I mean, it's still a small drop in the bucket. Every state should have 2 or 3, right? Which trains people in the state on state-related issues, on local issues, so that they can take an active interest in very local kind of policy issues, right? I mean, we have 1.4 billion, 30 states. I don't know how many districts, right? And it's like you need that many. We are underserved. It's probably because it's hard to make careers and get funding that stops people. But I would like to see, I mean, if I have a wish, it would be to have 2 public policy institutions, in 2 Takshashila equivalents in each state, at least.
Wow, Ghee Shakkar, in your excellent move. Going back to that early journey, I want to know how things were for you across these 2 areas. And one was donors getting funding, because number one, you would have had no credibility as an individual with them. They are looking at you as random, well-meaning NRI is coming. He's a blogger, which most non-bloggers would use pejoratively. And a blogger wants to start public policy school, asking us for money. What the hell is going on? And number 2, donors, unfortunately, mostly from what I have seen, and obviously I have no experience of actually ever speaking to a donor, and you do, but donors tend to focus on what is measurable and attributable. And your mission in that sense, to the extent that you're running a marathon and not a sprint, as you say so eloquently, a lot of what you do is neither measurable nor attributable. What were the early days like in terms of finding donors, getting them to take you seriously, getting money in? I know you made a laudable decision right at the start that you won't take foreign money. So what was your thinking behind that? How did all of this play out?
I think we were very fortunate to get the early donors that we did. For example, Rohini Nilekani was the first donor. And we had a meeting after TED in Mysore, where I pitched the Takshashila model to her. And in the model, after the meeting, she said, I disagree with almost everything that you say. I disagree with the way you're talking about reform and markets and all of that. Because she obviously has a very different ideological, she comes from a different ideological spectrum, right? She said, I disagree. And I thought, man, this is it, right? This is finished. So a week later, she wrote back to me saying that, yeah, I saw your pitch. Send me more details. I'm willing to consider funding you. And I said, man, this is amazing. So I wrote back to her and I went to meet her. And she wrote the first check. And she said, look, I disagree with what you said. I asked her that question, I think. I said, I thought you disagreed with us. She said, I disagreed with most of the things that you guys say in terms of markets, etc., because that's not what I believe in. But we are at a stage in India, and I remember her words very clearly. We are at a stage in India where we need a lot of voices in public policy. And we can't be sure which is right and which is wrong. And I was said, wow, okay. So she was and that type of donor has stayed with us all through, right? So all our donors are like that. Very few donors, I don't think we've ever had a situation where a donor has told us what to write, what not to write, what to do, what not to do. I've had fierce disagreements with donors in personal conversations where she said, Rohini, for example, would say, no, this is not the way. For example, we had criticized NREGA at that time. And she said, I think NREGA has a role. It might not be the best solution for what we do, but it's a useful thing. You can't disparage it the way you did. So I said, but I think, from my perspective, it's not the greatest of ideas to solve the problems that we have. So we've had disagreements on policy issues, but not a single donor has ever told us what to do, what not to do. And I think it's the mutual respect that the donors have with the institution. They understand this is an independent institution. It has credibility because it's independent. And I think they've had the grace to let that independence flourish, right? It's also true that we don't have a large number of donors. We have a small number of high net worth donors who support the core mission. And then we have program donors who are a larger... Program donors give money for specific programs, right? But core donors are a small number. And I think mostly they might not agree with us on everything that we say, but I think they all agree that independent voices which have integrity, which mean what they say, are important in India's ecosystem. And that's why they've supported us. We've been fortunate, right? Because you're right, absolutely right. Because if you go to a larger set of donors, usually you have expectations, right? It's not always a very commercial thing that you say what I want you to say, right? It's almost like certain donors have a preference. Certain donors would want to do rural development, right? And focus on rural development. Some donors would want you to do climate change. Some donors would want you to do, solar energy, right? So there's a preference for areas of interest which they want to support, and sheer pressure of funding causes think tanks to sort of pivot in the direction of where the funding is. Fortunately, we've not been like that. We've been given the complete independence to decide what we want to do and navigate by our lights. Internally, for me, and I think Pranay will sort of amplify this, is that national interest is the driver of what we do, right? What do we think is the national interest going forward-looking? Because we don't look at issues of the past. If you look at 3-5 years ahead, what are important issues out there that matter to India's national interest, and what are we doing about it, right? And that can change from time to time, right? For now, for example, in the last 2 to 3 years, the emphasis on technology and how it changes our politics and social life is front, right, and center, right? So we focus a lot on technology. Maybe 5 years later, it's going to be something else. So that's how it is.
Take me through the journey of how easy or hard it has been for you to wear the many hats that you have to wear. Like you start out as, you're an engineer, and then you start out as you're a bureaucrat in Singapore at the start of this journey. You start blogging. You are in the world of ideas. It's beautiful. In the world of ideas, you get into rabbit holes. You say what you want to say. There's no responsibility upon you. But then you found an organization. And then at one level, you are a manager and you are managing people. And there is even there an element of micromanagement where you have a small team and you're managing each of them. Then you get a bigger team, you're running the whole organization, you have to zoom out and take that larger view. And these are all different hats and different requirements. And then you are fundraising, as you pointed out, which is your core responsibility, and no one can it's ultimately it's really up to you to get that job done, and that requires wearing a different hat. So in that personal journey, and a question for both of you, because Pranay, you also made all of these transitions later on in the Takshashila story. How was it to, wear these different hats, learn those different skills? Because if I look at myself, I'm like, some of those hats I would never ever want to wear. I know what I do, I know what I love doing, but you guys had to do it because there's that larger purpose. So how was it?
Yeah. First, I want to preface this by issuing a statutory warning to all listeners. If you want to do thinking, don't start a think tank. Join one. Join a good one. Because if you want to think, starting one is just not the recipe for it. You do entirely other things other than thinking. But the hats business, I think one thing I've been very clear about is do the right thing wearing the right hat. It would not have been correct for me to do a Indian public policy ecosystem or intervention wearing the hat as a Singapore civil servant, which is why I resigned to start this, right? You shouldn't be too timing, because the conflict of interest, etc., can just go out of, even if it is not a conflict of interest in your employment contract, it's a conflict of interest in concept, right? Morally, it's a conflict of interest. So you need to separate the two. So you have to do things full time, do it 100%. Don't try to do it. So, for example, this is a very clearly a non-profit enterprise. There is no profit motive, right? There is no return on investment. There is no shareholder who gets money back, or you have to be very, very clear about it, right? A lot of these value confusions in early days, if you're not clear about it, ends up blowing up in your face in ways. OpenAI is a good example, right? They started off by saying, we're going to be a non-profit for the thing. Once you realize that, there's money to be made, you decide, okay, I'm now going to be a for-profit enterprise, right? Which is a huge moral failing, because, you've raised so much of capital in the name of philanthropy, and that means the cost of capital was low. And then you've done something which is commercial with it. And now say, look, I'm going to, it's not ethical at all, right? So you've got to be very clear about who you are and what hat you're wearing. You're absolutely right. I think the big challenge of a job like this is not so much the management. I'm fortunate because I've never had to micromanage. I've never had to sort of manage. The organization runs by itself. There are extremely smart people who are diligent, who really imbibe the values of the organization, right? So I could be out of the office for months together and everything will happen maybe better than when I'm around. But the biggest challenge in this is managing stakeholders, which is donors, and compliance, right? Compliance in India is just, running a non-profit is harder than running a massive political party. I think the two largest political parties in India have fewer compliance requirements than us. Right, we are there's tax compliance, there is shops and establishments compliance, there's a whole lot of fire safety. You're just running around trying to do compliance. So each of those things can trip you up. So being compliant with the law and raising enough money in the right way is the hardest one, and it takes time off. I think when I was younger, context switching was easier. Now that I'm older, context switching is hard. So to move from a conversation about strategy and fundraising and compliance and tax, filing our tax returns, to a conversation on technology policy or defense, it's like, it's not easy. So it does take a toll. That's why I said, if you want to think, don't start a think tank, join one.
If I could add one thing which has helped us is, that there's that meme, right? You can just do things. I think one idea that has been in Takshashila is really living up to that idea that you can just do things. And a lot of the people here, for example, are not PhDs in that particular subject. Most of the organizations would have some requirements of credentials to be able to participate in that kind of work, but Takshashila doesn't, right? I had no idea about foreign policy principles and Morgenthau and all those books before I came to Takshashila. I had just some broad idea, but I worked in foreign policy. So a lot of us come from very different disciplines, and we are trying to do something which was not our area of college studies. So that sort of gives the confidence that you can do things, and that helps us even when you're trying to approach, like, now you have to do fundraising also. Okay, that was not part of what I had. But the fact that, you are now discussing, you have already tried to do things in which you didn't have the credentialized education for, means that you can also do different things. So in that sense, that gives some confidence. And it is tough, but it gives confidence that you can do. And as an organization which is also building, you also realize that you have to do all the things. It's like it's a startup, right? So in a startup you can't say I will have a department which will only do these things. You have to play the part which the organization demands, or which you think which will help the organization. So you just do that and have fun doing that.
Tell me also about how you got the people in the early days. Like now, I would say you seem to have a virtuous cycle in place that so many people have done your courses and are policy scholars themselves, and many of them would love to work here. And you can probably pick and choose, is what I'm guessing. But in the early days, there was nothing. You're still in that vicious cycle. The ecosystem is very poor. There aren't good thinkers around. Why would they want to work with you anyway? You're a blogger who started something. So, how was it in those early days? And, maybe coming to Pranay later, where you came later on in the journey, how did you hear about Takshashila? What made you interested in policy? Why did you do the course to begin with? And why did you decide to work here?
I think Pranay should answer it first, because it'll sort of add color to what I would want to say. Right?
Yeah. Okay, so
2014, right?
yeah, I joined 2014 and I did the GCPP fifth cohort in 2013. So I was following blogs, your blog, Nitin's blog. That's so I was actively reading things on public policy, but this frame of public policy I didn't know. I
Well,
was
he
mostly
was a
reading.
semiconductor engineer at Texas Instruments.
Yes, as a chip
That's
design.
important to know.
Yeah.
He was not reading it from somewhere. He was designing chips.
Yeah, as a chip designer, and as I said, I always want the India idea is something which was always in the head. So was preparing for UPSC at one point of time also, but always in that setting that I want to reading opinion pieces in newspapers and all was something which I was deeply interested in. And when I came across the blog, I came to know, okay, there are people outside the government writing about foreign policy ideas about how government should run, which was quite interesting. So at that point of time, we used to have those RSS feed readers, right? And that was one of the best things on the internet for me. So just going through so many of these feeds was the starting point. And then incidentally, someone in our while playing cricket, I was in our company cricket team, one person told that there is something called a course that you can take while you are working at while you are working at Texas Instruments or any place. You don't need to quit your job in order to learn something about Indian government. I said, wow, I mean, amazing, right? Like otherwise the opportunity cost for someone like me at that point of time who had spent 6-7 years was significant. I couldn't have quit my job just to explore things which I don't know anything about. So that was a new thing that, okay, you can do this course and it can fit into the busy lives because there was sessions on the weekends and you could do things through the week without having to quit the job. That was really interesting for me. And that's why I took the GCPP course in 2013. And that time Shruti was also teaching one of the modules on constitutionalism, so we had electives, all that. So once we did the course in May 2013, I thought, wow, this is a really interesting field, because as Nitin was saying earlier, that was the first time when I got to meet in our workshops also the people whom I had read in newspapers. So for example, one of the persons who was at our workshop was Praveen Swami. So Praveen Swami, as in the Hindu, you would read his byline, by Praveen Swami. I always wonder why this guy knows so many things. And that time you're now meeting Praveen Swami. I said, wow, this is amazing. I get an opportunity to at least put my whatever bad ideas to discuss with him at least. So that was quite inspiring. And then I said, okay, then Nitin and others, when I think the organization just had 2 or 3 other people, and that time there was this idea of a scholarship also, that you could do a part-time scholarship and work on a research project of your that we were interested in. So I did that while I was again working. By the time I was in another firm, and I started working this part-time on a foreign policy project. And by that time, that Kida was already there in my mind, that okay, this seems very interesting. I really enjoyed the course. I enjoyed the fact that I could write. That before that I did have a blog, but writing very infrequently. But then through the course we had to write things. Wrote, sent a bunch of things to Nitin, Pavan, others also, and they were also quite encouraging that this makes sense. So that gave the confidence that I can write about things which are beyond my domain of expertise. I can explore things. So that was really the starting point, that I thought, if there's an opportunity to do this in a more sustained way, it might be a good thing to try at least. And that's when then Nitin said, why don't you join us? So I said, that obviously, because you're in 7 years in a career track, you need to think of trade-offs. So I had to think of trade-offs, that what about this career trajectory that I am having here, how will that go? And I was also enjoying things there, so it's not as if I had a bad boss, or I was having quite a lot of fun in that world also. But this was just more appealing to me, that things I wanted to try. And then I said, okay, let me at least try for a year or two and see if it is for me or not. So I took the plunge, and that was 2014 March. So that's how.
So he's sort of his story, his timeline is really a success story of how we managed to get good talent, right? Because see, the best talent in India is hiding in all sorts of places. At this level, I mean, Pranay is a highly educated semiconductor engineer. There are also people who might not have a formal education who are also hiding in the vast wilderness that is this country. So for us, the GCPP is still the single most talent hunting spot, because people come there self-selected, right? No one's ever asked you to do a GCPP, right? No one ever says that, oh, do you have a GCPP? I'll give you a government job or anything, right? It's like you have to, you have to want to do it, right? So it's self-selected. So that already meets one test. There's a small fee that they have to pay, but it meets that test. And during the GCPP, we get to interact with people over 3 months. So we know who they are, they know what we do. So that first ice is broken, right? We get to know each other. From there, you need to still smoothen the process from, your particular job to what we're doing. So we try as much as possible to get you a smooth transition. I think Pranay's example of a scholarship, and then that's what it was. It's GCPP, then there is a sort of a gray area where you're doing both, and then you decide whether you want to jump in or not. We still have that kind of a system to get people in. Early days, I would know each single journey because we were just handful, right? When Pranay joined, I think he was the third or the fourth person in the office. And we were, also we didn't have large budget, so we were very careful in whom we hired. By around 2016-17, word had gotten around that this is an interesting bunch of people, is a great place to work. And so, word of mouth had gotten around. So we were getting a lot of CVs for people to join. The challenge still is like what Pranay said. How do you get the people who are genuinely interested in the subject versus people who have an academic credential in the subject, right? So the academic credentials part, it's a double-edged sword. You do get people who know the subject, but they also have very fixed ways of approaching a particular subject, right? Which Takshashila doesn't. We don't have a fixed way of approaching anything, right? The idea is, can you innovate, right? Can you disrupt? That's the thinking. So entrepreneurial thinking. So people who've been through an education system in India, especially in the social sciences, are wedded to schools of thought. So it's very difficult for them to sort of shift. So when we select, then we have the challenge, can this person think differently? My preferred way is to get people from different disciplines. I keep saying Pranay is a successful semiconductor engineer who joined us. Manoj is a failed actor who joined us. Shambhavi was a successful PhD in biotechnology and cancer biology who joined us. So General Menon is a retired soldier who joined us. So, you have people from different backgrounds and doing different things. I think that's a risky model. It's worked for us. I don't know whether it'll work for everybody. But having a multidisciplinary, multi-interested bunch of people hanging around in the same space in a collegial atmosphere can create electricity, right? It galvanizes things, sparks fly when that happens.
Tell me about the think tank aspect of it, because for a while after you started in 2009, you were a think tank right at the start. The rest of the stuff is happening later. So, how was that? Who were you tapping into? The ecosystem wasn't there. Today, everyone who works with you are, in a sense, created by you, beneficiaries of the work that you put in then. But in the early days, how is it working? What are you writing about? And I know it's an extension of the blog and then Pragati. So take me through that journey also. That in that intellectual space where you're saying we are thinkers, we will write about ideas and then we will get the ideas out there with a magazine and then we will be a think tank and we will try to do more with the ideas. How are you tapping into people? Initially, like you pointed out, you went to K. Subramaniam and then Arun Singh pointed out that, hey, that's a cliched choice. You don't stand out that way. Create the new guys. So, creating the new guys comes later. But then how are you sort of navigating that I want content, but I also want content of a certain standard and quality. And initially, I'm guessing it's a bunch of friends who are coming together. You're doing the I blog and then that becomes Pragati and then that becomes whatever. But what is that journey of finding fellow warriors? Warrior scholars, was that the word? Scholar warriors, yeah.
Yeah, see, so I don't want to make it sound that I'm like this soul founder, charismatic but there were a lot of us, right? And when I say there were a lot of us, it's very loose because people who formed people who were trustees or directors might not be the same set of people who were engaged in that, fermentation process, right? So there were a lot of us. Narayan Ramachandran, who's a co-founder, who's now stays in Bangalore. Ananta Nageshwaran, who's a chief economic advisor now. Samir Wagle, Niranjan Rajadhyaksha, first Ajit Ranade, Bibek Debroy. Many of these people were around. Sanjay Baru, right? So many of these people were around in one way or the other, creating the sort of intellectual heft for this to happen. It's not a single person effort. There were a huge number of intellectuals. We were very fortunate because each of these guys is like the sharpest brain or the sharpest mind in that field, and they're all independent thinkers. They're not tied down by partisan lines or ideologies and so on. So they're very sharp, independent thinkers in their disciplines. So that was, but very few people were full time, right? That's the difference. And in fact, the organization was designed not to require full time. If I still have a slide which said, if I need to do a policy brief on energy security, I need a person who knows energy economics, a person who's done energy trading in international energy markets, a person who's sailed ships, and person who has secured ships like a naval officer. But I don't need all of these guys 24/7 through the month, right? I just need 3 hours of their time over a period of a week, or maybe 12 hours of their time over a period of a month, right? So the modern way of creating a think tank is to reach out to smart people wherever they are, make demands of small slices of their time, put those slices together and cobble up the knowledge that you need, right? So the success of an organization in the information age is being able to do this. Disaggregate competence and knowledge, find a way to re-aggregate it and synthesize it in a way that you want. There's a secret sauce in being able to do that. The secret sauce is not employing these 10 guys full time, right? So that model still continues, although now we have a lot more people in a full-time role. But we still engage extensively with people who are experts outside, right? And, one of the best things I found is that the smartest, most talented, the brainiest people are so willing to give their time to do something interesting, right? In our mentorship, which we get people to mentor young people, we get some of the world's best scholars to mentor young people from India. I mean, we just give them a token honorarium, right? But they're not doing it for the honorarium or anything. They're just doing it because here's an opportunity for them to engage and do something productive, right? So that's one wonderful thing about this space. The better the person is in a particular field, the more willing and more ready that person is to do something which is completely altruistic.
Tell me also about how you think about the role of embedding values within an institution. Like, one thing that I love about this place, and I keep evangelizing about this place, is that tank scrub which you have on Tuesdays or whatever. And I've attended, like when I've been in town, I've attended them, and to me they are just mind blowing, because for the listeners, what really happens is that a bunch of people at Takshashila and perhaps guests will, 10 minutes each, 15 minutes each, talk, do a presentation, talk about what they've learned that week. And it is multidisciplinary. You're listening to the sharpest minds of different subjects, sharing, practically thinking aloud for your benefit, or sharing some framework they've learned. And I just find that it is so incredibly stimulating to be in a room like that. And the other thing I've realized that, when I've hung around in the office, and there's Pranay and there's Manoj and there's Shambhavi and there's you and, other people I have known who are not here now. And it's such a vibrant atmosphere that everybody's curious, everybody's open. There is no office politics that I saw. For a couple of years, I edited the online version of Pragati 2017, 2018. And it's such a great space to work in that sense. And this does not happen by accident. Initially, I understand if you're a small group, your values percolate down to the small group. But as organizations get bigger, you have to obviously think about how to design it in such a way that these values are embedded through, and, they remain. You're creating a virtuous cycle. What was that process like, both in the happening of that process and in your thinking about that process and, fixing frameworks to it?
Yeah. So actually, this is a very good question, and values are supremely important to us. I know it sounds like a LinkedIn MBA speak that values are important and you put some things on the wall, right? But in our case, we don't have a set of, in fact, we have a values framework, right? It looks very unwieldy, but we realize that you need value systems for different levels of what you do, right? You have a set of organizational values, which defines what are the values that we want to see in Indian society, right? Which is freedom, pluralism, tolerance, good citizenship, India as a international power, right? So those are the things which we want to see in society. Those are the values we want to drive in society, right? That's one set of values. The second set of values are the values on which we are constructed, right? Which is independence, non-partisanship, integrity, which requires you to do a few things like, once you say that these values are fixed, it requires you to do a few things. It's like, okay, we don't take foreign money. We don't take any kind of donations which make us lose independence, right? It might limit us to how much money we can take because you're closing all doors. So you have a very small trickle of money, but that's what it is. So it also tells you how much leeway you have, right? So that's another set of values, which is about how you structure your organization. Then there are two other sets of values, which one is how we do research or how we engage, right? It's about openness. You're confident yet tentative, right? You bring evidence to the conversation. So you don't respect schools of thought, right?
Strong beliefs weakly held, as Pranay puts it.
Yeah, correct. And you bring empirical evidence. You have conversations based on facts, evidence, reasoning, rather explicit reasoning as we call it, rather than any implicit, I got on the right side of the bed and I feel this is so, right? So that's how you engage within the organization, which is what you would have seen in Tank Scrub, in other conversations. Nobody in Takshashila is immune from being challenged. In fact, in our meeting rooms, we make it explicit that younger people don't sit in the second row. You might have seen this, right? In many places, there's a conference table, so older people, senior people sit around it, and then there's a back row where all the young people sit, right? Which is almost like saying that you're a bacha, or you're junior, so you sit at the back. We make an effort to make sure everybody is seated around the table so that anybody and everybody can be challenged, right? But the obverse of the challenge is you've got to have facts. You can't just challenge and say, I'm going to cancel you, Amit, because you used a bad word. It's a politically incorrect word or whatever, right? That doesn't, a public policy institution is a place where you cannot have political correctness inside. You should be able to, discuss issues threadbare, sans political correctness, get to the meat of it, right? So it also means you have to bring evidence. You can be a 19-year-old challenging a 90-year-old, but the rules of engagement are the same. You're not exempt from bringing evidence just because you're 19, right? Similarly, a person who's 90 is not exempt from stating something just because he's 90, right? So you bring evidence. The last value system we have is for engaging in public discourse. In fact, this is so important because what we do it's not only about convincing people about the ideas that we have, but it's also showing people how a debate ought to be conducted, right? Democracy is only as good as its discourse. If your public discourse is all about like what you see on Twitter today, right? If it's a cesspool, you're not going to be making any intelligent decisions, right? There's no knowledge coming out of a conversation. There's only heat and anger, anxiety coming out. But you want light to come out of the conversation, you need to have proper public discourse. So we have a value system where, and that's non-negotiable, right? You have to be non-partisan. You distinguish your private opinion from institutional opinion. You show reasoning. You're civil in no one swears. No one gets into a shouting match. These are and there's an ombudsman who's a director of the board. So if those values are infringed, anybody can write to the ombudsman saying that, look, a Takshashila person was rude to me in a public discussion, right? And then we have ways that we've almost never had to exercise the ombudsman option because people are always there. But it's a framework. So it's not something which I can read out to you that there are 5 values. It's a slide in which there are 25 things. So when we first show it to new staff, I think there is a sense of, oh my God, what's this? Why are there so many things? But we have periodical, I think almost once every half year, we gather together to discuss those values and go through it again and again and again. Because even if you know this and you've learned this, by heart for the last 10 years, it's important for you to do this session with new people so that, that value system is not only real, but is seen to be real. Because most people are cynical, right? Because they've seen these things on McDonald's walls and KFC walls. This is a value statement, this is a mission statement, and people just get on with it, right? So there is a lot of cynicism to that management style, MBA style value statement. But in our case, it's real, it's practical, it's real, and it's vital to what we do.
If I could add to that, see, in the organization is also a complex adaptive system. So what are the leverage points which make it effective? One leverage point definitely is the people. So the hiring is really supreme, and not that we've always gotten it right. We've also made that mistake, but that is the first starting point, right? If there are the right people who have these values that we want to espouse, then a lot of things become easier, right? So we'll put a lot of thought into that. Many times we get it wrong, then we try to improve. But that's the first point. Then once the person is in, one idea that I've seen in Takshashila is to highlight principles and not rules, in that sense that there are broad principles that you should know, but then you should have the agency to then make the change, because again, it's a startup, you might have to do things differently. So a lot of focus is on telling people that these are the principles that we stand for, and then you are on your own to innovate and change things, but stick to the principles.
Just like you lay out the strategy, they do the tactics.
Yeah. And that is very explicit. We try to highlight that a lot, that these stand by these principles, but then you have the freedom to change things. So that's one. And what helps again is, like we were mentioning earlier, because there are people who have come from different domains, I think very few people can claim to be experts at anything. There are, you can say Gentleman and Dr. Rao and Mr. Arni, they are experts, but apart from that, none of us are experts in the things that we do. And once we know that we are not experts, things become easy. Like you can always be challenged by anyone, and you should be able to give good evidence if you want to convince someone else. So that's what happens in Tank Scrub discussions also, that people come from very different priors, and oftentimes the people who are not in the organization will come with even different priors, and they'll bring different ideas. So that happens, and that's the fun part of it. So you need to make the same points again and again also, because you need to be able to give better evidence to different people. So that happens. And on the values bit, which Nitin was saying, so actually it's a mind map. There are those 4 values that there are corporate values, which we talk about. For example, one really the important thing that sticks out for me is the idea of excellence, because that again, in this setting, it's very easy to not be excellent. So what excellence means, and to try to and aspire to be the best in the world, is really important in all the things that we do. So there are a bunch of things on corporate values. There are the political values. These are the values that we want to see outside in the world. Then there is a code of conduct about how individually we participate in public discourse. And there's the 4th set of values on how we conduct our research. So these 4 things we try to internalize and try to talk about it as often as we can. And most importantly, live up to it, right? Otherwise, just talking up doesn't make any sense. So people need to see that these values are honored on a day-to-day basis.
To quickly double click on one aspect of what you mentioned, the hiring, that hiring is critical. You have to hire the right people. So how do you get a sense of that? What do you look for? What's a red flag? What's a green flag, etc., etc.? For both of you.
First would be curiosity. I think that is really important, because public policy, again, it's very difficult. The way we are structured, domain expertise is okay, welcome, but you need to be able to know core ideas from many different disciplines, because it's an applied discipline, right? You need to be interested in economic reasoning, you need to be interested in some public finance, you need to be interested in foreign policy. All these are necessary components of a good policy analyst. So I would say that is really the core idea. If there's a person who's curious about different things, wants to know, that's like a green flag. I would say on the red flag, there's a difference between an academic, an analyst, and an activist. All 3 are different. So we have that, we realize, right? So an analyst will be a person who's willing to start from first principles, think of frameworks on their own, is not stuck to a school of thought which is being given by some great writer earlier. So you need to be able to challenge those things. That's an analyst view. But there are people who will be good academics, good activists, who don't fit into this role, right? For example, an academic might come from the frame that, I know this domain, so I really know this and I don't want to know anything else, and I will be really good at this domain. That works well for an academic, but for us it becomes a challenge, because you need to be able to straddle different domains and bring knowledge and assimilate knowledge from areas that you really don't know about. So people who are too set in academic ways, it becomes tough. Similarly, people who are too set in activist ways also becomes tough, because again, public policy activism is important, but as a public policy organization, you want people who are willing to think beyond beyond just political parties or the parties they like or they don't like, and think more broadly about what can make things better off. The perfect policy solution doesn't exist. There will always be trade-off. But so you need to be able to internalize that, I mean, things are better off. That's more important than you getting your best solution. That is very tough. Many people fall into either the academic line or the activist line. So to be able to convince people about that, as an analyst, the role is different from both of them, is a tough thing.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I think the academics, the one more problem with academics is not just about they're focused on a narrow issue, but very often the levels, by the time an academic arrives at the truth, it's already too late, right? An analyst has to work with imperfect information. So you will rely on empirical evidence. But sometimes empirical evidence is not conclusive. The causality is not proved, right? I think the classic case is this Jonathan Haidt and social media being a problem, right? So he's been saying this for a long time, but the academia in the US was unwilling to accept of the role of social media in creating harm in children and others, right? Of course, don't worry about the solutions which he but he was arguing that social media has a role to play in politics and how adolescents are behaving. Academics were unwilling to accept this. There's no evidence, right? But by the time the evidence comes, it's already too late, right? So a policy analyst, therefore, has to be able to make that judgment call on how much of empirical evidence is enough for you to start moving and come to some tentative conclusions. And maybe once new evidence comes, you'll change those conclusions. But you won't wait for perfect evidence to come and then all data is available for you to make that data, right? So that a lot of academics, when they enter into public policy, that's their danger, because they're waiting for way too much of evidence. The challenge with activists is the good thing about activists is they are wedded to a single cause. The bad things about activists is they are wedded to a single cause, right? India's challenges are such that they keep, we have to figure out now how does AI change governance, right? What's the role of AI on politics, on society, on employment, etc. Now, we've got to be, Takshashila, because it's in our mandate, we are going to be working on that. But if you're wedded to a cause which you took up in 2015, and that takes 20 years to solve, you're just fighting that for 20 years, right? Then you won't be able to do the next thing. So an activist, a genuine activist, is one who's not willing to let go until the finish line is met. As an analyst, you just have to hand it over to the appropriate activist and move on. The other challenge with activism is strong ideological or political orientation, right? Which is also innate to activism. It's in a sense that you can't be a good activist if you don't have these kind of things. And those get in the way of being able to make policy judgments, right? Not because any government is going to do some things right, some things wrong. You should be able to say the right things are right and the wrong things are wrong, right? You can't say that, this is a government I don't like, so everything they do is wrong. Or if this government is one I like, so everything they do is right, right? So that's the challenge you have.
So I guess in a sense there's openness, which is a curiosity you speak of. There is a breadth, like CLR James said, what do they of cricket know who only cricket know? So similarly, what do they of X know who only X know, whatever the subject is. And the third, I guess, would be a sort of bias for action in the sense that as opposed to the academic who wants perfect information and etc., you're willing to put yourself out there and take a stance on imperfect information, as you're saying.
Yeah. And you've got to do that, right? Because otherwise, you can't make posthumous policy, right? What's the use of a posthumous policy? It's like you've got to do it prospectively. And that requires you to take certain challenges, which is why, for example, I have great sympathy for governments who make policy and get things wrong. Because they're at least trying, right? They're taking a risk. So you're wrong sometimes because, the evidence you got is wrong. Maybe your logic was wrong, but you made that decision, right? An analyst has to help that kind of politics, that kind of policy making where yes, we see, in a way, I must tell you about this, what I call the word for it, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. It's omphaloscepsis.
Okay.
Okay. Omphaloscepsis is the word for navel gazing. Okay. So what happens is, I think in India, traditionally, we know that India's invasions have mostly happened from the Khyber Pass, right? Invaders have actually come through the land route, through the Khyber Pass. And usually the centers of power are in Delhi, Mathura, Agra, in the North Indian heartland. None of these guys ever looked at the Khyber Pass and said, look, I need to have some spies there, right? I need to get information from there. So when the guys are at Khyber Pass, I need to mobilize so that when they are, across the Indus, we can still fight them there and, get rid of it. No government, right? No government in India worried about what's happening at the Khyber Pass. It's only when you stand on your fort in Delhi and look over and see the enemies in Panipat, they say, oh my God, Panipat aa gaya hai. Now we've got to fight, right? So most of your wars were fought in Panipat, right? Which is like, walking distance from Delhi. Whereas they should have been fought in across the Indus at least. So you would have had that distance. But I think there is this tendency in government not to be forward-looking. Maybe the governance in India is such that you're so preoccupied with the here and the now and with the legacy of the past that you have very little bandwidth to look at challenges of the future, right? And if you could sort of do something about them, they don't add up to your backlog, right? If you could, just block the Khyber Pass, the guy can't come, and then you don't have a massive invasion to deal with, right? But and it just costs you maybe a small amount of money to block the Khyber Pass. I don't know, maybe Khyber can't be blocked. I think the Bolan can be blocked. One of them is very narrow, right? You can just block the thing, right? So, as a metaphor, I think that's how the policy system in India works, right? That you wait for the enemy to be in Panipat before you react. I think that's the thing we are trying to change, right? And how is it that we can staff up, A, as an organization, and B, as people within it? How do we get that kind of posture that allows you to look at things which are ahead of you and do what is necessary to prevent bad things from happening, or maybe take advantage of that opportunity?
The Khyber Pass metaphor is such an excellent one also for our personal selves. For example, even with our health, until a major incident occurs, we are not really taking care of all the small things that we do. And therefore, all of us fall at the Battle of Panipat while we could have stopped it at Khyber Pass.
Khyber, yeah. Why? Maybe that's the thing. The question is, why weren't there so many battles at the Khyber when most battles were at Panipat?
Yeah, we have first Battle of Panipat, second Khyber Pass. So let's take a quick commercial break. On the other side of the break, I want to dive much, much deeper into your policy school, which I think is a service to this nation. So more on the other side of the break. Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you. Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm still here with Nitin and Pranay playing the long game like me. And let's talk about the policy school now and take me through the early thinking on it and the evolution of it, because a lot of things about it are pretty unique. They look standard now, but they're pretty unique in terms of doing it in a remote way, allowing people to do it part-time without leaving their jobs, having uncredentialed people teach subjects. It's not all PhDs and all as in other universities, but you guys were teaching subjects, and I wonder if there was imposter syndrome on the one hand, and on the other hand, a fear of being taken seriously by the market. So take me through all of the early thinking and the early evolution that happened.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. This is a very nice story, and even I'm surprised by it. So when we started, right, I told you in 2009, we said we have to be a think tank, a school of public policy, and a megaphone, right? And my plan in that slide is that we would start being a public policy school somewhere in 2018-19. Okay, it's about 10 years after we started, because we would use the first 10 years. Now it's laughable. We'll use the first 10 years to create the body of knowledge necessary to teach good public policy, right? Because in 2009, there's no syllabus, right? There's no case study. There's no syllabus. The textbooks that you have are, some socialist way of looking at the world, and they'll talk about 5-year plans and all that drama, right? They're all trapped in a particular mindset. And we wanted to have public policy for an India that is growing, not for a 1960s India. There was no curriculum and there was no faculty. So we said, okay, we'll be a think tank, and as part of the think tank, as we generate policy briefs, etc., we'll also create books, case studies, etc. We'll accumulate them over 5 to 7 years. At the same time, grow some faculty, hire some faculty. In 2015 to 2018, in that time frame, we'll start a policy school. And that was the plan. Then in 2010-11 is when this whole Anna Hazare movement starts. Right? And I remember the Anna Hazare movement I think 2011 was when it peaked, right? But around 2010-11 was when it was germinating. At the peak of it, I wrote this FAQ saying why the Lokpal is a bad idea and hunger strikes are the worst way to achieve that bad idea. I had a FAQ with about, I think, 20 questions on saying why it's a bad idea. The moment I published it, I got trolled like hell. And not just on Twitter. I received some 2,000, 20,000, I can't remember. It's like some that scale. Emails.
Wow.
Saying that you are a nasty guy, you're a anti-national, you got money from... in fact, I wrote a humorous essay for Rahul Bhatia once about... Somebody had said that some Anatolian women give you cash in suitcases or some weird things. Okay, so some weird things like that. So that was in 2011, and there's this massive sledging going on. Okay, and then this one guy on Twitter asks me, "Sir, you say Lokpal is the wrong way, agitation is the wrong way. What is the right way?" I thought he was trolling me, right? I kept quiet and he persisted. Then he sent me an email. And then I found out from interacting with this guy that very few people, of the millions of people following the Anna Hazare movement, very few people actually had an idea of how to engage with the system in order to change it. Right? They had not thought of it. Nobody had done civics properly, right? Nobody understood civics. They didn't even know. It's like, Chetan Bhagat at that time had coined a phrase ki mera neta chor hai, right? And that became very... Then I actually said, mera neta kaun hai? Do you even know who the guy is responsible for your street, right? Do you know who's your municipal councillor, your MLA? You can't go and say your MLA is MP is a crook because your road is not fixed. Because the road is not fixed by the MP. The road is fixed by a local councillor. You don't even know who that guy is. So a lot of people did not know how the system works, or I would say still do not know how the system works and don't know how to properly engage with it. And that guy's email said, "Boss, we can't wait till 2017 to start this course. We have to start it now. And we have to start it in a way that makes sense to these people who are in the Anna Hazare movement, right? Who are usually young people, professionals with a busy work life. And also have a family life, social life, right? And you ask this guy, let's say this guy is a vice president at Infosys, and say, okay, here, why don't you take 2 years off and go to Harvard Kennedy School and do a MPA? He's going to say, I don't want to do a MPA, for 2 years. 2 years of seniority, 2 years of lost salary is a lot. I'm not going to quit my job to do a MPA, right? MBA maybe, right? An MPA, unlikely. So, it was... The opportunity cost of a full-time public policy program was high and is still high for people who are most desirable as candidates, right? So the people, you have adverse selection. If you have a 2-year program, you only get the people who most likely don't see themselves as in a dynamic career in private sector or in government, who have the time and energy to take the 2-year program, right? So we designed the program to fit into the interstitial space in a person's life between career and family, right? And it's delivered online, and it's delivered in such a way that it doesn't make exorbitant demands on your time. It's flexible enough for you to juggle your other things, but at the same time is so rigorous that I can even put my hand on my heart today and say that we have the best public policy curriculum in the country, if not in the world. Right, which is relevant for that person and its highest standards in terms of rigor. Now, that meant that we had to accelerate the public policy school by 5 years. We didn't have curriculum. We didn't have faculty, right? When we advertised, we got students. We have about, I think, 40 over people signed up for the first batch right after. And I remember I was in Anant's house, current chief economic advisor. We were having a conversation. This is in Singapore, November, late October of 2011. And we were talking about these changes. And I said, boss, we have got to deliver the program next year in 2012. And he said, how? I said, let me think about it. Maybe we'll do something online. And then the week later, thought through and said, okay, this is how we're going to deliver the GCPP program, right? It helped that I had been through a public policy program just before that. for 2 years. And I knew that a lot of fluff can be removed, right? You can do the core in one semester without losing much of detail, right? A whole lot of the detail, you can leave it to the people to explore. But the core you can deliver within a semester. And 2012, we launched the program in November 2011 and we started the program in January 2012.
Wow.
Right? So it's about 3 months from concept to delivery. And that's essentially the same core module has continued with a whole lot of variations after that. One more thing was, I was very particular that we should not be a MOOC. Because you can learn programming online, you can learn English language by talking to a bot, but you can't learn public policy online alone. Because this is a social thing, right? You learn by engaging with other people, by persuading other people, and being persuaded by other people, right? So if you're not able to engage socially, you can't learn public policy. So it is an ultimate classroom course delivered properly, right? Not like a lecture course, but a classroom course where you can interact and workshop. So we had 2 workshops where people had to physically come and do workshops in order to get the qualification. So it was not a MOOC. It's still not a MOOC. There is an option for people to complete the academic program without turning up for workshops, but they don't get the qualification. They just get a citation saying you've completed studies. And we give them students ample opportunities to come and do the workshop with subsequent batches and so on. But you have to engage, right? So many years after that, we built an interactive simulation game called Nagara, which simulates a democracy in action, where everybody role plays. You play a politician, you play opposition politician, you play media, NGO, etc. So the whole idea is that if you don't experience that life of dealing with other people, other interests, and finding how to reconcile, most of your knowledge of public policy is just theoretical, right? So Takshashila insists that you do this. So that's how we started, right? And since that time, Pranay, I don't know, you joined in 2014, right? So this was, yours was 2013. So this is still the early...
Yeah, the 5th cohort. So the course has been running every 4 months. So once in 4 months since that 2012 period.
3 times a year.
So we have, now we are in our 42nd cohort, which will just get over. And that has, so when it started, I don't think there was this vision that it will continue that way. But Ravindra, who was there at the beginning, he was insistent that we should do this and deliver it, not after giving some gap and thinking whether it will work, just deliver it every 4 months. And that we have stuck to. I think a couple of elements to add here was, of course, that because it fit into the interstitial spaces, it was really useful that people from different disciplines, domains could come in. And that, I think, is the public policy school part is the most energizing part, because you meet really interesting people every 4 months. I don't think you get that opportunity in any other job, right? Just the fact that, first of all, these people are self-selected. They are as motivated as you are, or even more than that. And they can engage with your ideas. They are not promised that you will get some job after this or anything. So they are really coming in because they are curious. And that is really fun stuff, right? Again, because I think a think tank can become boring also, because if it is just isolated and only talking with the government, I mean, how much fun can you have? But if you're just meeting motivated people every 4 months, it's superb, right? And all our books also, the books have been some collaboration with the GCPPNs. And
another interesting element of this, a big jump was, in 2017, General Prakash Menon and I, we were going somewhere on a flight. We were on a flight together, and we were at the Bangalore airport lounge, and we started discussing the curriculum of the armed forces, right? Basic curriculum about strategy, etc. And then he told me that the curriculum is very static, very rudimentary. Most of the curriculum is into their professional art, right? How do you, tactics, military tactics, right? But the conceptual framework is not taught because they don't have the time. Because each of the training academies, the calendars are extremely packed. So they sort of compress what you would call the theory part to a small little bit. And most of their education is professional. So he said, what can we do to change it? I said, like, why don't we offer it to the Ministry of Defense and we'll run the Defense and Foreign Affairs program for X number of colonel level officers. So MOD was extremely happy with it. And since 2019, we get about a few hundred colonel level officers taking the course every year. So the good thing for them is for the first time in their careers, they engage with classmates who are from other, they're venture capitalists, doctors, technical people, engineers, etc. And for the civilians, it's also fun because they're engaging with military officers as part of their class, right? And then those friendships stay for the rest of. Where else will you have a classmate who's a colonel, who goes on to be, high-ranking officer in the armed forces? So the armed forces, the Defense and Foreign Affairs program is open to both military and civilian people. It's not closed. It's open. In fact, we are the first organization and school to teach Arthashastra in the modern context. In fact, the conversation with General Menon was also about this. Why isn't Arthashastra being taught to our military officers? Because there's no capacity, they don't know how. So we created a curriculum. Kajri Kamal she's not from a standard academic path. She was doing something else. She was interested in Arthashastra. She worked with us. We encouraged her. So she's developed the curriculum. She's India's foremost authority on the Arthashastra today, right? Now, we don't teach the Arthashastra as some kind of a ancient epic which needs to be venerated, put on a pedestal, and, Kautilya knew everything and we have to sort of just follow what he says. The way it's taught is first, mainly to understand the principles and the ideas where the guy was talking about. And the second part of it is how do you adapt those lessons to a modern context, right? In some places it makes sense, in some places it doesn't make sense. I mean, you don't have the superintendent of elephants, right? I mean, Kautilya said you should have a superintendent of elephants. You're not going to have a superintendent of elephants in the Indian army. But you'll adapt that idea to a modern context and see how it. So we now are able to, really impart this idea of classical Indian statecraft to modern practitioners. My grouch is that we are not able to do the same for other disciplines, right? I'll give you an example. When you study international relations in the West, everybody starts off with the history of the Peloponnesian War by a guy called Thucydides. Okay, Thucydides was this first historian. So he wrote this book about the war between Athens and Sparta, which has all sorts of, principles of international relations which come from that. And it's a great classic and it's well taught. But when we in India read the history of the Peloponnesian War, it doesn't connect. I mean, what is Athens? What is Sparta? How does it mean what to us? What's our classical literature, right? There's no recorded history of a war in, at least in the way that Thucydides has done. But when you look at it, we actually have a war which we've written a lot about, and that's the Mahabharata war, right? It's initially a very small war, a war of the 10 kings, but then a whole lot of masala gets added over a period of time, and then it's, layers and layers of masala, right? That's your Mahabharata. But the core essence of it is a history about war and statecraft. Nobody's done that, right? There's no literature. So, in fact, we had one person studying that. We are trying to develop that also. Can we study the Mahabharata? Take out all the divinity part, right? I mean, you have divinity which says, I'm God, I'm the super user of a network, I can make any rules, I can break any rules. That doesn't make for strategy, right? Strategy is human strategy. I mean, that might work for spiritual attainment, but not for military strategy. For military strategy, you need the material and the human. So, we are trying to build some body of knowledge which looks at Mahabharata as your, founding document, distill the material and the human from it, and use that to study statecraft. Because I think there's value in that, right? Because everybody knows that epic. Everybody sort of relates to it in one way or the other. And if you can use that to emphasize statecraft, diplomacy, politics, war, offense, defense, etc., espionage, will be very useful. But we've not been able to find people who can do that. And one of the greatest, I think, for all the, resurgence of confidence in Hinduism and Hindu civilization over the last 10, 15 years, you don't have world-class investigation into classics of Indian tradition in India, right? So the best things still people do it abroad, right? So it's not just Sanskrit, right? I'm talking about various other languages. You don't have any investigation or a methodical study of classics in India. It's been done in a hagiographic tradition. People sort of worship it and say this can be no wrong, but that's got limited utility in the modern world, right? Analytical understanding, analytical study, adaptation for modern circumstances, it's not done. Something which I would want to do, and be able to deliver this kind of knowledge through the policy school at Takshashila. But that's for the future.
Actually, when you mentioned that you said you thought you'll start your policy school after a few years, develop a body of work and all that. That's very resonant for me, and it feels to me like the fourth leg of the stool that isn't there. Because whenever people ask me for basic ideas on liberalism or basic ideas on X, Y, Z, and those basic texts actually don't exist. And a part of the blame I take on ourselves, because we did not write them. We are the people who should have written them. But they don't exist, and they don't exist even now. I mean, you guys have brought out anthologies and the stuff that you've brought out. Pranay is, of course, writing one book every 3 weeks and trying to fill that gap as fast as he can. But it's not there. So do you also view that as an essential part of what you're doing, that you have those primers?
Yeah. See, in the early days, we focused a lot on building curriculum, right? These were policy briefs, lesson plans. So today we have an outstanding curriculum for public policy anywhere in the world, but highly relevant to India, right? And it's evolved over the past 12 years. We've put this online, free of cost, on Open Takshashila. So today anybody can take a Takshashila course free of cost on Open Takshashila, which is just the static part. All the lectures are there, all the texts are there, all the lessons are there. Only thing which is different is in a GCPP is that there is a live element, right? You have a classmate, you have a class composition. Otherwise, all of that is there and it's updated on a regular basis. So nobody in India, anybody in India who needs an education in public policy of the first order can get it at Open Takshashila. Now, as far as books are concerned, I think we got serious about them about 5 years ago. We said that, look, now we need to be able to produce books of a certain nature. We still don't want to go into too much of academic writing, because that takes you into a very different world. But can we produce books that can be used by analysts, can be used by serious professionals in India to understand serious topics, right? So we are doing a lot better on that now. Pranay is doing it only at once in 3 weeks. I think he should do one a week.
Yeah.
So that he can make up for the rest of us who write one in 5 years. So, but yeah, writing of books is important. Not just us. We are also trying to work with other people to write books on substantive matters in the Indian context. But that's again a function of time and money and resources, right? So
if I could add that, like, see, because we are in the information age, I don't know what you think, but just books are just one media.
Yeah.
But for example, in the information age, probably newsletters over the last 5-6 years have been really important. So that's why a lot of us write newsletters in one way or the other, and that is also building that body of knowledge, which is contemporary, and which is also bringing some frameworks to people in a format that they can easily read, because they might not everyone will have the luxury or interest in reading a book, but probably a newsletter they can read. So in the information age, we need to explore any format that we get an opportunity to do. So that's been the attempt. That's why the podcasts, that's why the newsletters, that's
and
why
Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts also we need to discuss.
Correct.
This. Yeah.
That we've not been very good at, but we are trying. And even different kinds of courses. So you don't need to have this. So we've tried to do various versions of things that we can offer really quickly, right? So for example, the AI is in the news, so we had a course on politics and policy of AI. Or China is become a strategic, in the mental space now, everyone recognizes that it is India's most significant strategic adversary. So we had courses on China and now China's defense. So that flexibility is also a part of the policy school. We have to be able to deliver newer things at a quick pace. I also wanted to add something to what Nitin said about the defense and foreign affairs, because one really interesting thing which comes out of that is many people in the armed forces are operating in zero-sum contexts, right? They are only one person can win a war. So what they take away out of the course is most strikingly the bit from economic reasoning, because for them this idea of trade being positive sum game, it hits them the most, because that's not the situation that they are operating most in their professional lives. So the other thing is they do realize it, but the priors that get shaken most for them is on the economic reasoning part. So I have interacted with so many of our alumni in the armed forces community who always remember what Anupam and Sarthak have told them, about economic reasoning, trade being a positive sum game, comparative advantage, all those things. They really retain it years after the course, which for me is like amazing, right? That there is something that there was a new frame of looking at the world that they gained through the course, and that's really important. After this DNFA, we also Defense and Foreign Affairs course, we started the technology policy course also. That again came from this realization that we are not in the industrial age, we are in the information age, and because we are in the information age, things have changed. The politics has changed, the policy making has changed, the way we see nations has changed, the way governments operate have changed. Overton window is stretched on every issue. So we need to be able to tell that also to people who are already technologists, but they want to explore how public policy making can impact their industry and how they can also shape things from the government. So that's when the tech policy specialization of the GCPP started. So around 2018 or 2019, and that's the attempt there is to tap onto people who are in the technology domains, but they are curious about how the government works, and discuss issues related to information age economics. For example, how network effects operate, how does that operate. For example, our idea of monopoly power and market failures in the information age can be very different from the industrial age, right? Because most of in information age, monopoly and market power is a feature of how many of these markets operate. So how do you teach that in a way that makes sense is a core idea. So that has been one. Then there was also this PGP course which started in 2017. That was people after doing GCPP always ask, what's the next step, right? Okay, I'm interested, now tell me more about this. And that's when we thought that you need a deeper dive into things that people want to learn after doing this 3 weeks. So for example, if they want to learn public finance in more detail, or strategic studies, foreign policy in more detail, and can you do that in the same mode as you do the GCPP? Again, for a year, opportunity costs are even more significant. So using that same model, can you do a deeper dive? And that's how the PGP started. So yeah, these were some of the elements that palimpsest that grew on top of each other. Yeah.
So I want to dig deeper into the kind of people who do your courses and how that has evolved. But firstly, how many people have done your courses overall through time?
Oh, the number of alumni now, I think, crosses 10,000, or is it more than that?
7,000, 8,000.
Depending on how you count.
Yeah. If you take all the courses, it will be around.
Yeah, we'll be around 10,000 in terms of number of alumni. A strict count would be around 6 to 7,000. A broader count would be about 10, because there are short courses which people have taken. Yeah. So here's the thing. Today we produce about 1,000 public policy graduates a year. Half of them roughly are military officers. So that makes us the largest by number, right? But I think 1,000 is not enough given the Indian context. But I think 1,000 is a comfortable number for us to maintain quality.
It's 1,000 more than the entire country was producing 15 years ago.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's 1,000 more than exactly. It's in fact 1,000 more than what India was producing even 5 years ago.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, so it's a huge number. So But I wish it could be larger. But to be larger than this, you'll have to be a different type of an organization. So I think we are at. My sense is that we are at a sort of sweet spot now in terms of this. But what we've done is, as Pranay said, we have short courses which are really time sensitive, right? If people are talking about politics and of AI, we could do it. We can launch the course tomorrow, right? Geospatial, which Nitya teaches, people have to study geospatial. We can put it up, in a short order. The other success, which Pranay told you, is the postgraduate program. It's a 48-week program. It's an MPA. And I openly tell people, when people come and say, should I do a Harvard MPA or should I go abroad for an MPA program? I ask, what is your objective, right? If your objective is to make a global career in public policy consulting, then by all means, go to Harvard, go to the school, Lee Kuan Yew school or wherever you need to.
Credentialism.
Yeah. But there is a reason for it, right? People want to make a life. Or if you want to work, for example, in international development in Africa or somewhere else.
Or people just want to see the world outside India.
See the world outside India or move abroad. That's fine. But if your objective is to do public policy in India, to work towards India's development, as a boss, you don't need to waste that much of your hard-earned money or your parents' hard-earned money. Come to Takshashila. In 3 months, if your window is 3 months, we'll give you the best public policy program that you can get to do work in India. And if you're further interested in 48 weeks, which is our PGP, we'll give you an MPA which compares with the best in the world. And if your intention is to come back in India, this is better than anything else you have in the world. So a 48-week PGP, in my view, prepares you to do, it's an MPA. If you were a university, you would have called it an MPA. It's not a university, it's self-certified, so it's a postgraduate program. 48 weeks, outstanding. But I tell you, one of the most recent graduates of this is Vice Admiral Suraj Berry, who received the PVSM this year because he was the commander of our nuclear forces during Operation Sindoor. And he is Commander-in-Chief of the Strategic Forces Command. And he did an PGP with Takshashila last year. And it's amazing what kind of student he was. The most diligent student you can think of. And his work was on HR changes in HR in the Navy. How do you make the Navy more sensitive to modern changes in society, getting women in combat roles and women career paths for women. So a completely dedicated, motivated guy, Vice Admiral, spends a year, in spite of all the Vice Admirally things that he has to do, did the PGP, right? So it tells you that, at that level, you're a busy Vice Admiral, you can still take that course. To me is a vindication, right? That nobody can come to me and say, look, I'm very busy now, give me leave. Can you extend my deadline for my assignments, etc.? I say, no. If a Vice Admiral can do it, you can do it, right? So, but that's the kind of people which we are getting in the PGP now. Really, people in mid-career or senior levels who know that there is a gap in their learning and understanding which they want to close, or people who are a little younger who want to make a career in public policy, government relations, etc. in the country.
Give me a sense of how the people who do these courses, especially GCPP, have evolved over time. Like initially, I get the point that it's a self-selected bunch, so they're hungry to learn, and that's great, and that's obviously been a constant all through. At the same time, given how our education system is, it is quite likely that most of these people are coming in with a lot of shit you have to get out of their heads first. That there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done, and over time, what have you seen that has a required unlearning become less and less as your ideas have been out more in the discourse? And also, do you tend to find that practitioners who are actually doing things in the real world are more open to ideas than people who are, for example, coming straight out of college and they've embraced a belief system in a particular?
Good one. I think the amount of gunk that is there is not changed. The gunk, at least from my perspective, the gunk remains, right? It could be a different type of gunk, but there is gunk in which the system does. I think the system does a lot of damage to your ability to learn, right? It takes away your confidence. takes away motivation, takes away curiosity, fills it with a standard one-liners and a cynicism that you only study for a test, right? So all of that is still there. It's not changed much. What you have now, thanks to WhatsApp University, is, see, earlier you just had to deal with people who were part of the sort of intellectual establishment which was left of center, right? People didn't believe in markets. People were skeptical about markets, government and statists. That's how they were. But now, because of WhatsApp University, you have a lot of people with bad information, right? Which is like, you believed in the wrong. Maybe the equivalent is like the US anti-vax kind of guys, right? So you have the wrong information, a great deal of information, a great deal of confidence in the wrong information. So that's not an artifact of the education system. That's an artifact of your WhatsApp University.
Which is the education system also.
Yeah, which has become the education system.
So give me an example of this.
For example, so unlearning is required, but unlearning is required in different disciplines as compared to what it was 12 years ago. For example, now people understand that liberalization or deregulation is required. I think I have seen that change. By 2012, people would still question that we were in that atmosphere where we thought just make everything a right to education, right to food, and problems will get solved. I think people genuinely believe that, but now people realize that governments cannot provide it. So the students who come in oftentimes realize that, but in some other areas that unlearning might still be required. For example, this idea of inequality versus growth, that still is a thing that you have to challenge. Environmentalism does come up in different ways, and then you have to tell people again and again why growth is still required, right? You can't do all the things that you want if you don't have growth, and that is a constant challenge. But generally people realize that all the solutions don't lie within the government. You need a robust private sector in most of the domains. So that change has happened, I would say, in the last 10 years.
Yeah, in terms of WhatsApp University thing, it's mostly in terms of, see, when you're trying to teach international relations or military strategy, you need to have an objective understanding of history, right? What happened. But WhatsApp University is full of wonderful interpretations of history. Who won the war, who lost the war, when did this take place, who did what. So a lot of that is sort of built into the people. So when they come in, but if you have a wrong understanding of, let's say, India-China relations, and your history is all cuckoo because you got this on WhatsApp, how are you going to do, prospects of India-China relations, right? So it's there. I mean, I just picked this because it came to my mind, but I think it's there. There's even the left-wing version of this also. The woke version of WhatsApp University also exists. So it's like a bimodal thing. Getting that out and making people say, okay, leave all of that out of the window. Think of this with an open mind. And now you said, what about younger people versus older people? See, I think it's to do with information consumption. Right? If people, it's like when I was a kid, people who read the Hindu, I lived in Tamil Nadu. So we had two newspapers, the Indian Express and Hindu. So you could, by talking to a person for 5 minutes, this is a Hindu reader and this is an Indian Express reader, right? So I think you have a similar thing going on with young people also, depending on, the course that they took and the place they came from and the information diet. You have certain dogmas which they believe in, right? And it's a lot of times it's to encourage the person to get over the dogma, set it aside, and then think for yourself. That job is still there. It's the hardest one. It's the hardest for Anupam, who teaches economics, right? Because so much of it is counterintuitive. A price cap actually reduces supply. It's very hard for people to understand this. People say, what, people are profiteering, the prices are going up, the poor people need these goods, so we have to put a price cap. So Anupam has this uphill struggle every batch, trying to persuade people that, look, these intuitive ideas that you have are not correct. Here's how you think. So it's the ability to change really depends on a teacher-student dynamic. because the student should know, look, I'm here for a lesson. And that's when the person will accept that change. But if it was a peer-to-peer debate on Twitter or on LinkedIn or whatever, he's never going to do it because it's a debate, right? I'm not going to yield on my principles because I'm debating you. So the teacher-student relationship is important because you're learning. At least you know, I went to that class to learn and he's my teacher.
Tell me about how the ecosystem has changed, because when you started, there weren't too many people who understood policy, but now you've trained either 6,000 or 10,000 people. Many of them, of course, are in the military. Many are government servants. They're part of the state. They're IS officers. There are other policy people elsewhere, etc., etc. And I would imagine that that has made your task as a think tank much easier, because there is surely a receptive audience, many of whom you've trained yourself. So give me a sense of how that's changed over this period of time.
I don't know whether... Yeah, the ecosystem does have people now who are far more equipped to have to spread that discourse, right, and illuminate that. That's certainly true. And that's not just us. It's also, I think, people have educated themselves. There are other policy schools, etc. So there is certainly a development, and there's a larger community of people who resonate with public policy. But that does not translate into influence and change in public policy, right? Because we all agree, but it doesn't mean just because we all agree the policy is going to change, right? That requires changes in government. That requires political conviction. Of course, the leadership must be convinced about certain things, and it needs changes within government. And that, I think, has been the harder one, because the machinery of government still is administrative. It's called the Indian Administrative Service. It's not the Indian Policy Service, right? So administrative considerations take precedence over policy thinking, right? Which means usually it's expediency. And it'll be some broad political guidance which has been given. Okay, if you're in the state government of Karnataka, the chief minister says, oh, we're going to give you a free bus service. And then the administration sort of tries to deliver that free bus service. You don't have civil servants who can go back and say, maybe that's not a good idea. I think it's very hard, whether it's a state level or the union level, it's very hard for the civil servant to go back to the political decision maker and say, this is not probably a great idea. I think that is the part which is hard to change. Now, I'm not saying everything needs to be second guessed like that, but you still need a greater amount of policy conviction, which comes from a greater confidence in policy education in the civil service. That doesn't happen. The civil service is still very administrative.
In one way, I've seen things change is, for example, now a lot more policy documents have their draft versions put into the public domain for public feedback. So a lot of our alumni students also respond to them. One group also presented in a Rajya Sabha standing committee. So those kinds of things have become more the norm than they were 10, 15 years ago for various reasons. Government is also on a learning path, right? So that has happened. The other thing I've also seen is because a lot of the domains that the government is now called upon to work on are really complex, right? So, I don't know, now the government has to come up with a national quantum mission. I think they realize that you need ideas from the outside to come in. Now, it doesn't work very well because, as Nitin said, the administrative state will not just be open to all the ideas, but there is a realization that you need some ideas from outside, or you need to hire some people for shorter roles to get their short-term roles to get their views on. That change has happened. So at least in the technology policy domain, we see governments being more open to listening to ideas from the outside.
And a lot of people, especially in the technological domains, a lot of people who are engaging with government, right? Now, what usually happens is they are contributing their technology expertise to the administrator. It would help greatly if they can also contribute their technology policy expertise. It so happens that not all the people, you're a great engineer, you can tell the government how an AI system works. But you've not really thought about AI's effect on India's constitutional setup, right? Or on or what happened when previous technologies were introduced. What are the social consequences? You've not thought about it deeply. It's not your failing because you're an engineer, right? But if you have thought about it, the quality of inputs you'll give to the government will be richer and probably will avoid some predictable mistakes.
And I think now outside the government also, most of the companies also realize that you can't interact with the government as you could do when the situation was closed. Right now, you have to engage in a forward thinking manner, and you have to engage in an open manner also. So in that sense, a lot of companies which had public affairs departments are now public policy departments also. So essentially they are, so let's say you're starting, like we had a student in the PGP course who had his own startup for these two-wheeler rentals when this was just beginning, 7-8 years ago, Anand. So the idea for him was also to learn, because there was no policy in place. Like, there's this, how do you also talk to the government to convince them that this is a good idea, this benefits others, and these are the kinds of regulations you shouldn't do to stop this from happening. So that was his motivation to also learn this. So a lot of the companies also realize that you need to engage with the government in a different manner, also realize what kind of policy governments can bring about such that these domains are not stopped. So that has also been a new area of interaction.
Yeah, but generally, I remember saying this to the first batch of students, that public policy is a sunrise industry. It still is. Because I think today, more than ever in history, is if a young person wants to enter into the field and want to make a career in public policy, this is a wonderful line to get in, right? Of course, it requires you to have some domain expertise in one area, right? You could be a lawyer, you could be an engineer, you need to have some domain expertise, right? You can't just be a generalist. Your career path will be great if you have a good first degree, right? But public policy is still an exciting field to get in. Because the kind of companies that are hiring, right? I mean, if you're looking at AI companies, a whole lot of AI and crypto companies need policy wonks, right? So, and they pay massively, right? They pay wonderfully. The tech companies pay wonderfully. But now, thanks to the President of the United States of America, government has entered every economic field. Right? There are tariffs, there are sanctions, there are quotas. So it requires you to be able, even if you are selling textiles, if you're making pumps, if you're making electric equipment, whatever industry you're in, you will need to have public policy expertise in-house, or which you sort of engage as a consultant. And therefore, it's become a field, it is almost as important a field as, your corporate lawyer, probably more important than corporate lawyer, because this also connects with customers and the public, right? So public affairs to public policy, as Pranay was saying. There's also the connection with the public, there's a connection with the governments. So it becomes a 360-degree kind of a discipline.
One of your compilations has a great title, Distance from Delhi, and that's obviously a metaphor for what is fundamental to Takshashila, that you embrace the distance from Delhi, but there is a trade-off involved. So take me through your thinking about this and both sides of the trade-off.
So the distance from Delhi started off as a joke in our first Takshashila workshop in Goa. So the idea, there are a lot of us engineers, etc. So we made this equation which is, not an equation, this relationship which is, the further you are from Delhi, your objectivity towards the national interest increases, right? So the
objectivity towards the national interest is inversely proportional to the distance from
Delhi. This is
engineer speaking.
Engineer speaking, right? So that was the logic behind that statement, and I think it's substantially true, because I think what happens in Delhi or in Bangalore as a state capital, or Mumbai as a state capital, is that most of the issues you deal with are the here and the now. They're politically salient, or they're urgent, and the political establishment, the government, is willing to listen to only those things which are hot, right? They're not going to listen to things which are cold and which are going to happen many years later. But if you're based in Bangalore and dealing with national issues, you have that distance. You're not going to be having lunch with the joint secretary every day, right? Or you've not been invited to a tea session with the secretary this evening at 5 o'clock to give him some quick inputs on something, right? So you have that luxury. That distance gives you the ability to think ahead, to pick and choose carefully issues that might be most important for India's future, and also to work on them in an independent, non-partisan manner, because the vested interests have not caught up yet, right? Once the vested interests get you don't have much of a policy room. But if you're talking about quantum politics, like quantum computing, and in the industry for quantum computing, there's no vested interest. So you can write policy briefs about quantum computing which are objective and in the national interest, and create the right kind of vested interests, as opposed to, let's say, agriculture policy, right? There's a fertilizer lobby, sugarcane lobby, tractor lobby. Everybody is a lobby. You just can't do agriculture policy. So distance from Delhi helps. The late Bibek Debroy, he was a advisor to Takshashila from the time it was formed until he joined government. So for several years he was advisor. And one thing he told me is that there is a geography of power which is a 5-kilometer radius around South Block in Delhi. And that geography of power is also the geography of influence. So if you are within the 5-kilometer, you have access to people in power, and therefore your policy influence is high. If you are outside the 5 kilometers, forget about it. Nothing is going to happen. I think that is right. If that is the zone that you're playing in, right? So, especially if you have vested interests, then that's 5-kilometer radius makes mean for you. But in our case, we don't have vested interests. There's nothing urgent and immediate that we get, and we can engage with policymakers from that distance. But more importantly, our theory of change is not talking directly to the policymaker. Our theory of change is, as I said, connecting good people to good ideas, to good networks, right? So who we are speaking to, right, as Takshashila, are the citizens of India who are able to make and influence political choices, right? And political decisions, therefore. So if let's say we make the case for labor reform, as we've been making for the last 10 years, you consistently make the case such that large number of people in the country believe and understand why labor reforms are important. And then they go and press on their political leaders in order to make that change happen, right? So that's the theory of change. So with that theory of change, yes, being in Bangalore is fine. You're outside the 5-kilometer radius, but you still make that change. Now, as you said earlier on, it's very hard for you to attribute any success to yourself, right? I mean, how do you go to say, did you get labor reforms done? Did you get ABC things done? It's hard because there's so many other players. But I think we've got to give credit to ourselves to say that we did the right thing. We made the right calls. We'll be consistently making it. And then success has many fathers, right? You're just one of the many fathers. But yes, you are a father. You have some paternity there somewhere.
There's a frame I rather like, which kind of I used to describe myself, and I'm now beginning to feel like it would have applied to you, but it possibly applied less to you more and more as time went by, which is this phrase which Janan Ganesh wrote about in an essay for the Financial Times, the partial outsider. The partial outsider is a person who's not actually an insider in a particular community, but he has kind of a leg in. He can talk to the people, he's, related in some way, and therefore the plus side of this is that because he's an outsider, he is not bound by the conventional thinking and the group thing that happens within the community, within all the insiders. But at the same time, it's only partial. He still has some influence and can change something, and people will listen to him. Now, I think of myself as, in every field that I have dabbled in, I am kind of a partial outsider. Like certainly whether it's policy or writing about economics or poker or podcasting or whatever, I'm a partial outsider in all of those. Nobody will accept me as an insider within the community, which helps me because I'm not bound by the conventions, and at the same time, so I can think outside the box, but at the same time, people eventually take me seriously and listen to me. And I would imagine that circa 2009, you were a partial outsider. But more and more, you made a journey towards becoming an insider. And in a sense, the distance from Delhi was much greater then than it is today in a metaphorical sense.
I don't think so. We are still partial outsiders. Your partial outsider metaphor is absolutely right. We're still partial outsiders. Because I'll tell you why. One reason why we will always be partial outsiders is because we're independent. right? In every single conversation, we are an independent, non-partisan outfit. And the nature of politics is such that people tend to prefer partisan our guy, right? So there's only so much you will get through to a politician or a political party by being an independent person, right? So people will, good politicians, good political parties will still see a credible independent player as a reference point, right? To say that what is it like, how do you know that, where the middle is, where the ground is, right? So the independent outsider provides that reference point, but it's not necessarily so that reference point also persuades the politician from taking that line, right? So it's very difficult to be an insider if you're independent and non-partisan.
I mean, you basically have to be in that 5-kilometer radius, like you pointed out,
Even
to have
if
a
you
chance.
are, right? Because even there, I think maybe I've not been inside, but my sense is that if you're there, this equation works even more strongly there. That if you're close to the the minister or the prime minister or whatever, right? The people who are around you need to be trustworthy people, right? People who have your complete trust, not necessarily independent guys. You might consult independent guys. As a prime minister, for example, you will consult independent experts because if you're a good politician, you will do that. But you won't surround yourself by independent people, right? You will surround yourself by people who are loyal to you. And I think that's perfectly normal and to be expected.
The way I would see it, at that point of time, you were complete outsiders. Now you have reached the stage where you are some partial. Outsiders. And I think one area where this impacts is the time horizon of issues that you pick up for analysis, right? Because if you are in that domain, you are responding to the government's exigencies. They are looking for some solution, and then you have to put your minds together. Like right now, there is an AI Impact Summit going on and last year there was G20. So a lot of the energy the government wants you to focus on that because that is on top of its agenda. But if you have that distance, you can think of ideas which will probably hit the government 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and then focus your energy such that, again, when the idea of the Overton window is be ready with the solution such that when the urgency hits, or you already have some good ideas in place, right? Because at that point of time, government cannot afford to think of ideas. They are going to bring solutions when they want.
Let me highlight this as a concrete example, right? Somewhere around 2017, a US-based non-profit company entity came to us. She was a speaker. She came to Takshashila and she gave a talk on why gene editing is a bad thing and why all non-profit organizations around the world, she used the word third world, etc., should gang up together and lobby against it in the United Nations and all other governments. And the moment she left, we had a conversation and said, boss, we have to do the exact opposite. India's national interest is not in joining some coalition to ban gene editing, but to ensure that gene editing technologies are available to India and in a responsible, in a way that is consistent with, necessary safety and all of that, right? Scientifically rigorous. And we have an open door. Because my learning point at that time was, if you remember, was genetically modified foods, right? Once we said no, and there was a court judgment, etc. Then we lost GM foods for 30 years. There's no way you could sort of open the door and go back and say, let's do GM, right? Which is, I think our agriculture has suffered because of that policy, right? Now we have, close one eye, grey market GM, but we don't have an open, flourishing GM industry, genetically modified. So gene editing was like that. So what we did is we drafted gene editing guidelines. We wrote a gene editing policy. And this is far ahead of gene editing being, this is 2017, right? This is far before all of this became a big deal. And we went to the government, we socialized it with the government in several consultations and so on. Large parts of it were adopted and became part of India's gene editing guidelines. So India had gene editing guidelines long before gene editing hit mainstream. So when it hit mainstream, India is a great place to do gene editing now. So you have companies, you have startups working in biotechnology which do gene editing, right? So just think of the counter example. If we had not done this, some voluble non-profit organizations would have gone, would have lobbied, and they'd made, the typical fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Government would have said, okay, we are putting a moratorium. Somebody would have gone to court, and the court would have said, stop this, right? And then we would have been left, and the industry would have, flourished in other countries. I mean, all these guys who ask you to ban, keep their industries open, right? It's always in my view, this is always a anti-competitive behavior at a national level. What they're trying to do is they're already in the bus. They're making sure other people don't get onto the bus, right? So, in a way, gene editing, therefore, is a typical example of a success story. That you engage early when the number of stakeholders is small, number of vested interests is small. You have a clear identification of the national interest, and you engage with the government in a way that makes sense to everybody, right? That's I think is a good model of how we ought to engage. Not everything works this way, but yeah, this is one good example.
I want to dig a little deeper into what you described as a theory of change. Like, I've always believed, as you know, that if you want to actually bring about real change, there is no point focusing on the supply end of the political marketplace. You have to go to the demand end. That the politicians are going to follow the status quo or follow their own incentives, and their own incentives are very strongly linked to what voters want. So that's where you have to go. That's the minds you have to change. And for that, in India, it is pretty obvious that what you can do in English is super limited, which is why I think Pulyabazi is again such a tremendously important sort of initiative there, because you're taking it out to Hindi, and I've been meeting people recently who are doing this in Malayalam and other languages, and so on and so forth. So tell me a little bit more about what your thinking is on that. How important are the languages? How do we take it in the languages? With your journey on Pulyabazi, which is also many years old, what have you learned? Are you sometimes frustrated by how hard it is or how slow it is? And how do you look at the future in terms of the engagement in the languages?
Yeah, I think languages is just one part of it. I would put it that way. You need many forms of engagement, and language doing this in different languages is one form. But yeah, we need to learn how to do this on YouTube. We need to learn because if the change is to make people think in a different way about the governments and make them unlearn things, whatever medium works. So that is the idea which drives a lot of these things. So earlier it was opinion pieces of newspapers, but that's not sufficient. Now you need to also see YouTube channels, and now you also, earlier it was Twitter also, right? Twitter was a part of that idea of changing how people think. So all of that fit into this journey, and languages is one part of it. Again, one thing I have realized from the Pulyabazi experiences, still in the other languages, at least in Hindi, I can say confidently, the newspaper systems are very ossified. Even the books, the publishing ecosystem is very ossified. For example, they'll be very happy to publish Yuval Harari's book in Hindi or translated in, but new ideas being talked about in Hindi which are diverging from what people thought 20 years ago, it's still very difficult. So non-fiction space in those areas is still not open. So that is a challenge. So that's where, again, you can't do this in the conventional way through books or newspapers. You have to make your own platform. So that's where podcasting helps. That's where YouTube channels helps. So that's been sort of the idea. And absolutely, one more thing we realize is that finally our target audience will be the people who are elite. And by elite, in the sense, anyone who can read a newspaper column in any language is an elite. So we are trying to address them. Public policy, probably every person in India out of 1.4 billion, I don't think half of them would be going into this domain. They have other priorities and challenges. But can you reach to the 5-10% of the people who are at the margin, who are thinking about this actively in their lives and want to play a bigger role in it? Say people who are in your resident welfare associations, or people who are thinking at beyond their own, they have the time, energy, luxury to think beyond their own self and their own families. Can we get them into the fold about thinking of this. That's been the attempt. So whatever medium works for that works. And we are always having this debate, why have we not gotten into some media, like on YouTube we should be doing more, what can we do there? So all those are part of this journey, I guess.
Yeah. One of the challenges which we face, and when I say we, now as Takshashila and we also as India, right, is people's primary way of acquiring information seems to have moved away from reading to watching, right, which is YouTube. Of course, there's audio. I would put audio as in the same, probably in the same category as reading, right, because it exercises, it doesn't exercise your visual thing. But once you go into the visual thing, the level of nuance, the sophistication which you have in a op-ed, the ability to go back, forth, your eye moves up and down, read, just goes away. It becomes very linear, very flat. And thanks to the way everybody runs, it's become shorter and shorter, right? Everybody says 30 seconds mein mujhe samjha do isko, right? But if you want to compress a 800 word op-ed into a 30-second video, you are losing things, right? And large numbers of people are consuming this 30-second video and are losing that nuance. Now, maybe larger number of people are now watching this as opposed to reading a news. You know, the number of people might be large. So there's a, you know, that trade-off. Larger number of people watching a smaller video, losing nuance, versus in old days, you would have smaller number of people reading but with great nuance, right? I think that loss of nuance is bad for a diverse democracy like us. You know, you don't need much of nuance, I suppose, if you're in a, you know, homogeneous, largely homogeneous society like Japan or China, you know, language-wise, you know, ethnicity-wise, religion-wise. If you're more or less homogeneous, it's one thing. But in India, with so much of diversity, nuance is everything, right? And you lose the nuance, I think we are losing something. So the transition from consumption of information from reading to video, I'm very, very, very worried about it.
What do you think?
I would say that I don't actually, here I'll push back slightly and say that I don't think it's a binary or an either or. The way that I think about it is that the number of people who went for nuance and read newspaper columns were always a tiny sliver of people, and that tiny sliver of people has remained the same percentage or maybe even grown slightly. What I think you're seeing is that the rest of the people who otherwise would not read the newspaper anyway are the ones consuming the 30-second reels and 1-minute reels. And therefore, it doesn't make a difference in the sense that the people who want the nuance are there. It's as many people, they're getting the nuance. But the reel watchers are more visible now. You know, and also that, you know, the reel watchers possibly have more shallow certitude, because that is also what social media pushes you towards. It incentivizes you know, firm expressions of certitude, and a lot of that is shallow. And many people who earlier didn't have a voice to speak up are speaking up, and it's great that everyone has a means of production. But I wouldn't despair unnecessarily. I think the market for nuance is as high, if not higher, than before.
I hope you're right. No, I hope you're right, because I'm worried. I've not arrived at any conclusion, but I'm tending towards seeing this as a negative. I'm tending, because the outcomes that you see, you know,
The shallow certitudes are more voluble for sure.
yeah, they're valuable, and they shut down good voices, right?
They have a chilling effect.
And they also incentivize other people to be like them, right? If you want to now be an influencer, will you write a 800 word op-ed like Pratap? Or will you be like this YouTube influencer who makes a 2-minute video which says this is right or wrong, right?
So there's a difference. Like, for example, when I talk about the seen and the unseen, or the frame that I use to talk about my own work, is something I borrow from Paul Graham, something Graham said about startups, where he said it's better to be loved by a few than liked by many, right? I'd rather have someone download 100,000, I'd rather have 100,000 downloads on an episode of the seen and the unseen than 15 million YouTube views, because 15 million YouTube views may be 15 seconds each. It's shallow, but, you know, my average session time is 40 minutes. So Pratap will get far deeper engagement from far fewer people, which I will argue in the long run will be far more consequential than the shallow engagement that, say, a bare biceps might get. But we don't know. We'll have to wait for all this to
Yeah.
play out. I'm just.
Yeah, but I hope you're right. I maybe I'm being overly negative about this, but this is a sort of an inescapable feeling I've had for the last 2-3 years that there seems to be something off.
So, you guys have shown a lot of patience, but of course, you are playing the long game. So, what will you have if not patience? Three final questions. And one of them, very simple one. Perhaps I should have asked it at the start. And for this, I'll take you back to the past. Why the name Takshashila?
Yeah, why the name Takshashila Institution, right?
Yeah.
Takshashila because we were inspired by the city of Takshashila, and institution because that's where they keep crazy people. But Takshashila really is about. See, I think if you go back 2,500 years ago, Takshashila was a place which is now northwest of Rawalpindi in Pakistan. I mean, it was still there, but Rawalpindi is now. You know what I mean.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like Takshashila is not now there. It's been there forever.
Rawalpindi came later.
Rawalpindi came later. So anyway, Takshashila was a place which was a host to a lot of. It was a university town, but there was no single university. There were multiple schools. There were learned people who would come there, set up shop there, and educate people. But it is a place where anybody who was a learned person in India would, or in that region, would go and get an education. It was a cosmopolitan town because it was a crossroads of Persian, Greek, Indian, Chinese, Tibetan civilizations. It was multidisciplinary, but known for statecraft, right? Like Arthashastra and Kautilya were supposed to have taught there. See, the other thing about the word Takshashila is that we want to be anchored in India, but global in outlook, right? And that was what cosmopolitanism was in Takshashila. The old Takshashila was not a inward-looking, omphalos-skeptic, the word I never get, inward-looking place. It was cosmopolitan, outward-looking, broad-minded. So that's what we want to be. And institution, as I said, place for other than being a place for crazy people, is an indication that we are creating a setup that outlives our careers and lifetimes, right? Because only such entities can create transformative change in societies as large as India, right? You're talking about 1.4 billion people. You're saying we're going to transform India. I didn't say we're going to transform it tomorrow or next week or next year, right? We're saying we're going to do this. It's going to take time. It might take, I don't know, career times or lifetimes, but that's what it is. So the hope is that we'll be able to sustain an organization that will outlive lifetimes and careers and lifetimes. And putting it explicitly in the name reminds everyone what the enterprise is all about, right? Otherwise, it's very easy to have a very PR-friendly name, which, center for this, center for that, or it's easy to have that kind of a name, which is modern, catchy, people understand. But I think Takshashila and institution are meant to remind us of what we are all about, right? It has to be Indian, it has to be global, and it has to be transformative in the long term.
I like the logo bit also because that's
you
the
should tell them
lighthouse.
about why the logo is the way it is.
Yeah, so it is a lighthouse, and lighthouse in economics, as you know, is an important. It's a public good, a classic example of a non-rivalrous,
Although kind of busted
non-excludable.
one because there were private lighthouses.
Yeah,
But anyway,
yeah.
leaving that
But
aside.
the output of it is
A public good.
non-excludable and non-rivalrous by definition. So that's the idea, that you want to be able to be this lighthouse on public policy ideas, which is open to all, and it is also shifted slightly towards the right because it was advocating right of center economics views, right? So freedom,
That's why
markets,
people look at the logo
etc.
and say, hey, your center, your lighthouse is not in the center. It's a little bit to the right. Say, yeah,
Formatting error hai kya?
Nicely
it's
done.
intentional.
Yeah.
Nicely done. Well done. So my penultimate question is, let's move from the past to the future. That you spoke about how you wanted to build an institution that outlives you and outlives people and careers, and that's why institution. And so, what is your future vision for Takshashila? Like, where would you like it to be 20 years from now? You also mentioned global outlook. I think Pranay once mentioned that many of his students have come from Afghanistan. So, and clearly these ideas are relevant everywhere, and good ideas are A, relevant everywhere, but B, they require constant vigilance because some of them are so counterintuitive and you have to keep hammering them home generation after generation. You never actually win the battle. And Takshashila's got to keep doing that, and it's got to keep to these values long after both of you are gone. So how do you think about that, what lies ahead, and how do you ensure that things don't go off the rails? Because pretty much it seems to me every great institution eventually goes off the rails. Maybe it takes 100 years, 150 years. What have you learned from that?
Yeah. See, first thing I'm acutely aware of is that in areas which are critical to India's growth and development and security, we have very shallow expertise. Right? Just look at Pakistan, for example. Right? Pakistan is a very important neighbor. How many genuine experts do we have on Pakistan? People who understand the country deeply, as opposed to people who read the news and have conversations about Pakistan. That's not expertise. That's familiarity, which is good, but deep expertise, right? In terms of its economy, its hydrology, its society, cultural moorings, Islamism, their defense things. We have very, very few, right? In fact, I would say that we have none. You take China, it's the same story. Technology policy is the same story, right? Geoeconomics, economic statecraft. So in all these areas, after you sort of get past the famous names in that field, you realize that there is very, very shallow expertise, right? In numbers and in depth. So we've been trying to change that for the last few years. Right? One of the programs we have is called the National Network for the Advanced Study of China, Network for the Advanced Study of Pakistan, etc. We lump all of these things together into an idea called an extraversity. Can we solve this problem of shortage by working with universities and students in universities in India who might be in Madurai Kamaraj University, Jadavpur University, various parts of the country, doing MSc or PhD, work with them, nurture them, and create higher levels of expertise in these universities, right? Now, to do that, internally we need to have India's smartest scholars. Today, I think we have, not by my measure, but by external measures, we have about 4 of India's top scholars, in certain areas. Pranay is one of them, Manoj is one of them, Shambhavi is there, Nitya is here. Maybe if you include, we have 5 maybe, right? 4 or 5. So, we need to have expertise in around 20, right? So, I can think of easily about a dozen more areas where we are short of the expertise and we want to build. And we can build it, right? So, and we want to be able to go to Indian universities and raise the level of about 1,000 PhDs or master students a year, right? So that's not our students; they're students across the country, but because they are plugged into our ecosystem, we can spend a year or so with them and raise their standards to world class. So that is what I think we want to do in the next 10 years, right? Beyond that is hard for me to see, right? This in terms of this is just sheer capacity to create change. Now, over and above this, there are several policy areas where we want to be able to influence India, right? I think one of the biggest things in technology, if you ask me, is the most basic thing about competition. Every single technological area requires competition, right? It's not about Desi or Videsi. It's not about sovereign or non-sovereign. It's about, do you have a competitive marketplace across the board in various parts of the technology ecosystem? One question, is it feasible? Because in some industries, maybe you can't have competition. But in areas that you can, how do you ensure that the industry is competitive, right? Because you've seen in the information age, everything gravitate towards oligopolies. And that's bad. right? It's bad for the market, it's bad for society. So how do you fix competition in various technology domains? Artificial intelligence is your most one, right? Now, if you look at biotech, that's the other one. In biotech, I think biotech is like IT in terms of its transformative potential for India, but it's massively underexplored, right? Basic regulatory reforms still waiting to be done. And there's if technology we have a weak wicket. In biotech we have an even weak wicket in terms of its policy depth. So we have to create people in the policy space who can do work with. When I say biotechnology, I'm not saying it very narrowly, right? The whole bioeconomy, everything from pharmaceuticals, healthcare, biological sciences, synthetic biology, gene editing, genomics. There's a whole vast things which fall under the rubric of bioeconomy, which we want to get into and influence. These are two of the things which come to the top of my mind. Down the list, there are a lot more. But one thing which, it's not just about areas, right? The thing which we do, we aspire to do, are come out with breakthrough ideas. It's not about, incrementalism, right? It's not about a little bit of a change. We have the luxury of being in Bangalore, far away from Delhi. So we have the obligation to come up with breakthrough ideas. There's no point in you being distant from Delhi and saying, what you've done is right, here, change it by 20%, right? Just to give you an example, right? And before you want to conclude the show, see, India's largest challenge, we've spoken about this before, is to create 20 million jobs a year. I spoke to Neelkant Mishra 2 days ago in Delhi. He says the number has gone up. It's 30 million jobs a year.
Wow.
You need to create 30 million jobs per year. The best we've done, however you count it, is maybe 5 million a year. So your asking rate is 30. Your scoring rate is 5. How do you get from 5 to 30, right? Most plans are about, we'll reduce taxes, we'll create this employment scheme, we'll do some skilling, we'll build some new universities, we'll reduce, compliance costs, we'll increase manufacturing, etc. Yes, they might get you from 5 to 7, maybe 5 to 10. But 5 to 30 requires step thinking, right? So one of the things we're saying is, why don't we create new cities, right? For the moment you create a new city, millions of people start getting employed. Now, how do you create new cities? You could create new state capitals, you could create new military bases, you could build brand new healthcare cities. And the advantage of creating new cities now is that you can build them in an environmentally conscious, sustainable way and don't make the mistakes that you made with your old cities, which are congested for the mistakes that you made, right? And second, by building new cities, you decongest your old cities, right? So there are answers like this. So this is breakthrough thinking, right? It's obviously the kind of idea where you go to New Delhi and say, build new cities. The guy says, which department should you go to? It's not my department. You go to the other guy. The other guy says, I'm health and family welfare. You go to education. You go to education. So, these are the kind of things which there is no known stakeholder. So
I get your broad point on on breakthrough ideas, but this particular idea I'll immediately push back on because it seems a very top-down engineering solution, new cities, and I think it's putting the cart before the horse. I'd love to see new cities. I'd love to see as many new cities as you want come up organically, prompted by conditions of growth and economic prosperity, and then automatically people gather and form those economic networks and cities form, and I'd love to see that happen automatically. And I think that has to come before the cities come. You can't just say, I
don't know. In general, I would agree. But in cities, I don't think there is ever an example of a city being created bottom up. You have communities which come up bottom up, which is happening across the country, right? Usually where there are 2 roads or 3 roads intersect, one guy sets up a thela and that thela grows up and then there's a cycle mechanic next door. And before you know it, it becomes...
In a sense, all cities kind of grow organically. That's a whole...
Well, that would be a settlement. We can get into the semantics. That would be a settlement, but a city is one where you plan for certain things. The infrastructure is planned.
I'm not arguing against planning a city. I'm just arguing against the concept that let's build 30 new cities and then things will be good. And I'm saying, no. If you build the conditions where things are good and the economy is flourishing, the 30 new cities will happen. And as they happen, sure, you plan them.
No, they
But
do happen, but they are not happening in the right way, because if you look at the
because the
Indian
conditions aren't there, because our economy isn't free, it's not
No,
flourishing,
in
etc.,
fact, our
etc.
economy is flourishing, but they're building. You have small villages which become bigger villages, which become small towns, which become bigger towns, but they still retain the old village mind that they were in. Right, a village is not a city. I mean, their villages are great. Maybe Gandhi loved them, but cities are not villages. Right, the kind of mindsets you need to have, the kind of infrastructure, the kind of planning, the kind of governance you need to have, it's very different. Right.
Fair enough, but I mean, that's
Yeah,
orthogonal as one example.
but a larger point to what you're saying is that, look, breakthrough ideas, when we think of it in policy, it doesn't matter whether it's top down, bottom up, left, right, left, right, because you see, ultimately it's about whether a particular solution applies in the particular context that you're working. Some cities might work when you're top down, some cities might work when they're bottom up. So I wouldn't get doctrinaire in any of these, especially, and this is probably to close this thing, right? In 15 years, what have I learned is not to be doctrinaire. There might be, I'm a strong proponent of free markets, but there might be a situation where I have to stifle markets in order to, get something done, and I have to do it, right? So we can't be doctrinaire. You can have a orientation, you could have a inclination and a default position or your normal bias, or at the margin, if there are two solutions, you choose the one which is more market wise and one. But overall, being doctrinaire can get you into trouble in a place like India. When I say trouble, it means you will end up doing extremely silly or useless things.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to this, many cities do have anchoring institutions and they have some comparative advantages that you need to build upon, right? So you might need government action to at least liberate those areas. For example, one thing one of the papers that was written is we have lots of these union territories today. They serve no purpose in today's economy, right? Why? Unless they are laboratories where you can do new things, but that's not happening right now. They are just something of the past which does not serve a purpose today. So if you can engineer policy which allows those union territories to be places where new set of governance zones, new things apply where people can do interesting things, then they can become areas where new cities and things are. So that will be government action, even if the government action is to get away
Like
from
special
things.
economic zones.
Yeah, or special governance zones, which Nitin has written about. There can be various structures to do that, but that requires conscious government action. Or like, for example, people now talk about moving away the IT system from Bangalore to others. So we think it's a stupid idea because agglomeration effects are what drives this. Even in the US, biotech is still around Boston. The engineering ecosystem is still around the Silicon Valley. You can't have, they have also tried to have 10 Silicon Valleys. It just doesn't work. So you will need to identify what will be the advantages in Bellary or what are their strengths, and then allow those things, create conditions in which they can actually become exporters of, I don't know, iron ore or some things which are there around those areas. So that requires conscious action, even if it is getting away from. So that's one point. I think one more idea of breakthrough thinking is we also want to rethink some of the principles on which we operate, like public policy. Also, it's an idea, there are established frameworks and people often see it as a linear system. But now one idea that we've been thinking about is how do we bring the complexity lens in Indian public policy? Because most of our challenges are of complex adaptive systems. Small changes can have very big effects. Very big changes can actually end up, very great policies which seem on paper end up having very
effect.
timid effects. Right? So how do you think of that? If you want to solve traffic problem in Bangalore, again, it's a complex adaptive system. Really small things like the design can actually have kilometers of jams as an effect. So how do you bring that new lens? It can be even evolutionary biology, it can be from complexity into public policy. That also leads to newer ways of thinking. For example, one learning we've had is you should not think in terms of policy recipes, but in terms of policy ingredients, right? So you can't implant one policy from another country where it has worked in our context, but you need to ask what were the ingredients which made those things work. So once you have those ingredients in place, then things can work very differently in India also. So that kind of thinking, which assumes public policy is a non-linear system, identify those leverage points which some small change can actually have mega effects, is also core area. So these are the kinds of breakthrough thinking which are slightly upstream of public policy, but things we need to learn and build expertise on, is what we try to do.
Guys, let me tell you something. I wish you the very best in changing India and solving all of India's problems except one. Don't fucking solve Bangalore's traffic. Who will listen to my podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is one problem. Kindly leave this alone. So so right at the end of this ep, I'm going to ask you to talk about your courses and plug them. Like, I know for a fact that many people have done Takshashila courses because they've heard the seen and the unseen, and either they've heard one of you or one of Takshashila scholars on my show, or I have said good things about it, etc., etc. But now I want to be super explicit and just tell all my listeners that, this is, I agree with Nitin when he says that this is absolutely world class. And if you really care about your country, and if you want to know more, and if you want to understand more about all the issues that are being spoken about, and more pertinently, if you want to gain the frameworks with which you see the world more clearly, these courses are absolutely amazing and you should do them, and they are part-time, and vice admirals have done them, as Nitin has pointed out, so there is no excuse for you not to do them. So yeah, so I will give that explicit plug, and at the same time now I'll ask you to talk about what are your upcoming courses, and what would you like to say about them?
Yeah, so bunch of things depending on the interest levels people have. I would say the first step is to join Open Takshashila. So that's a platform, that's a new thing we've created, massively excited about, because what we realized is, again, this connecting good people to good ideas to good networks also means it's not that we'll be able to do all the courses in-house. So Open Takshashila is a platform where other think tanks have also offered courses, and other people are offering courses in very many different domains where we don't have the expertise on. So the easiest way is to just join that as a first step, where you can get exposed to a wide set of things that you can learn in public policy. Once you're there, you will find some of the courses that we host. So the course that we have is GCPP, which we've talked about, Graduate Certificate in Public Policy, which is a 12-week program. And the course is meant for people, it's like a sachet course, right? People don't know about public policy, but they want to get the core ideas from important disciplines into their heads. GCPP is a great start. So 12 weeks happens thrice a year, and the applications for the current one are open, GCPP 43, so people can check that out. It has 3 flavors. So one is an advanced public policy course for people who really want to deep dive into market failures, how market failures work in different domains, how government failures work, how social failures work, and things like that. Then the other flavor is technology policy for people who want to know more about the intersection of technology geopolitics, technology governance. So that's the second one. And the third one is defense and foreign affairs for people who are interested in geopolitics, foreign policy, strategic studies. So this is the GCPP. Next year, May, we'll have the PGP courses next intake, which will be, I think, our 10th PGP cohort. So that's for people who want to deep dive or who want to change career tracks and are interested in making the switch to the public policy domain. So that's a 1 year 48-week course, and that starts in May. That apart, we do fun courses which are topical, right? Which might address some things which are in the news today. So we keep doing them on a regular basis. So space policy, politics and policy of AI. We have geospatial policies. China courses are offered every year. So if you are on Open Takshashila, you will see all of these things being offered. People outside Takshashila, for example, the people from Daksh have offered some courses on judicial policy, how to improve judicial performance. People from TrustBridge have offered courses on using regulatory analysis through LLMs. So there are, bunch of interesting things that happen. That is one set. The other thing which Nitin mentioned is we also have the extraversity program. So this is for people who want to spend 1 year part time, but 1 year deep diving on one policy problem and writing a high quality journal article. If that is what motivates you, we have this extraversity program which has 4 types of specialization, again, one on China studies, one on Pakistan studies, one on technology geopolitics, and one on law enforcement and policing. We want to add more to this, but right now these are the 4 that are already working, and there are 2 cohorts which have already gone passed through this, and there people are we connect people to mentors who are specialists in these areas, and these people work for a year to get a high quality academic output, or it could also be a set of policy proposals which are deeply thought through. So all these things exist as under the Takshashila banner for people who are interested.
I just want to add one thing. The one ingredient which we are serious about is awesomeness. That every single course, every single lecture, every single element of a lecture must be awesome. And we go to fanatical level of detail to make sure that awesomeness is met. So it's not just about the curriculum that comes at you or the great faculty that teach, but the entire experience of learning must be awesome, right? And it's the awesomeness is both desirable in its own right, because we want to be awesome, right? But also because I think that experience of awesomeness creates a certain standard or a benchmark of excellence that then you will want to do in the rest of your life, right? So very few people actually have seen excellent things, right? So it's, basically, when people have to come punctually on time, it's 9:30 is 9:30. And, it ends at 12:30 is 12:30 is 12:30. From basic things like hygiene factors like punctuality, good grammar, good written properly, clean and neat slides, all the way to how you feel when you're in a Nandi Hills workshop, right? Where a lot of people, there are 60 other classmates of yours. We are in Nandi Hills. We are in a classroom having a discussion. How does that make you feel? You're playing a simulation game called Nagara, where you're simulating an urban democracy, right? And you're playing the role of a media person or as a resident. How does that make you feel? Or you're in Exercise Amrut, which is a war simulation, right? And an asteroid from space is coming, is going to collide with Earth. And, people were playing some nuclear war, were in a nuclear war-like situation, suddenly have to deal with an asteroid, at 4 a.m. at night. How does that make you feel? So, those are all those things about awesomeness which we put in because, as I said, it's great, but most importantly, we enjoy doing it, right? We enjoy doing that awesome stuff, and then it filters down all the way to the small little things that you do in our courses. So you could forget about public policy, just do the course because it's awesome.
I love that. There's this great quote I love. I forget by who, Kevin Hale, I forget by who, but it's marketing is the tax you pay for not making your product awesome. So since you made your product awesome, we should not have plugged it at all because it's not required.
So delete this.
I'm not deleting this. No, final question. I know I said that was final, but how can I let you leave without some recommendations of interesting books, movies, music that you've come across recently?
I read fiction, right? And I write, I publish that my list of fiction every year also. And I read fiction, specifically speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, as a genre, but more not romance. I can't handle that. But this year I discovered an author called Christopher Priest. Wonderful guy. I think he passed away last year. And one of his books is called The Prestige. It's about 2 magicians. I think you might have read The Prestige.
I haven't read it. I've seen the movie.
Oh, there's a movie?
There's a movie.
Yeah. And then after that I started reading a few of his books. I think he's a wonderful guy. I think Prestige is one. And the other book I would recommend to people is called Everything Evolves. It's about evolutionary science. I think it's extremely important for people in any discipline to get a handle on evolutionary science. The argument in the book is that there are only two sciences, physics and evolutionary science, and every other science can be constructed from these two. So these are the two I would recommend.
I would recommend a book that I had recommended last time also, A Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. I think it is a great book for anyone interested to rethink the way they imagine the humans and how the world operates. I think the on public policy, because a recent new book by Devesh Kapoor and Arvind Subramaniam is great, A Sixth of Humanity. I would recommend that for people interested in public policy, because you get the entire breadth of Indian policies and the experience over the last 75 years, what went right, what went wrong, packed with great data, evidence, and they are going to make a lot of that open also, so people can work through it. And Assembling India's Constitution, it was another inspiring book that I read this year.
So thank you so much for being on the show, guys. More power to you.
More power to you, the seen and the unseen.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes at will. You should also sign up for Takshashila's courses if you want to understand the world better. It's not just that you have to make a career out of them. Even if you want to improve your understanding and make yourself a better citizen, I think they're really great courses. I endorse them wholeheartedly. You can follow Nitin on Twitter at Akon. You can follow Pranay on Twitter at Pranay Kotas. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AMITBARMA. And you can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in and every podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.